This long-haired student, even with a young girl by his side, has a certain type of fetish, and it is for 40-year-old teachers. But with a teacher like that, who wouldn't? Even though his duel is about to begin, he completely ignores his opponent. Ask the teacher out to dinner, and I'll already give you a spoiler that this dinner happened. Guy boy. The condition to accept the dinner is that he wins the duel. He not only gives his opponent a severe beating, but also cuts his vocal cords and breaks several of his bones. But why does this boy like older women and is so ruthless with his classmates? In the beginning, he was just trash who was humiliated hundreds of times. Even Frey Blake's father accepted him being so weak and told him to disappear from his life. Unable to handle so much pressure, he decided to go back to the lobby. That was when Lucas Traman took over his body. Lucas was the most powerful archmage of his era. A circle archmage capable of exterminating an entire army with just one spell. For you to have an idea, only 10 mages managed to reach the 8th circle in their lives. The guy was 9th circle. In the end, a demigod appeared and said he was arrogant. He challenged the gods themselves just for having reached the peak of humanity, then locked him away with a powerful spell. He stayed trapped in that place for 4,000 years. He was already almost losing his sanity. When Frey Oblique appeared in his consciousness, the boy regrets it and only wanted to be stronger. That was when Lucas took over his body. He swore to give everything Frey wanted, and also swore that he will take revenge on the demigod. He spent the night training hard. On the first day of training, he already managed to reach the 5th rank. Of course, he had to expel many impurities for that, and for reference, the school principal is the 6th circle. Now in the school courtyard, the bullies are greeting each other. Leader says he was eager to beat Frey again. They even laugh about having beaten him really hard last time. The fat one says that yesterday he saw Frey leaving the infirmary with several sleeping pills. Then they make a bet on whether he decided to end his own life or not, since the leader thinks he wouldn't have the balls to do it. Meanwhile, Lucas had expelled all the impurity from Frey's body. This boy must have really suffered a lot, but obviously not as much as Lucas himself. Shouldn't he look for a blood donation? Now in the Westro Academy cafeteria, everyone is impressed. Frey is devouring tons of food as if it were nothing. They assume he must have been a week without eating. The truth is that he has been 4 years without feeling any warmth in his stomach. Well, now Lucas has to attend school full of brats, even though he is 4,000 years old. He needs to understand how everything works, that only then he can take revenge on the demigod. Now, let's go to the classroom. The delinquents are already inside. Everyone stares at him, including the leader, who at the same moment says he won the bet because he is alive. Suddenly, the leader puts his foot right in front of Frey's path and says he finally arrived, calling him a classmate. Obviously, they are not classmates, and the humiliation is about to begin. Suddenly, the big fat guy grabs Frey and asks for 10 meal tickets that he lost in the bet. Frey only thinks who this idiot is for hitting his head like that. Obviously, this guy is not a friend of the previous owner of the body. Suddenly, he starts trembling all over. Why would he be trembling like that? When the fat guy's blow was about to hit, Frey appears behind the fat boy like Goku teleporting. Everyone in the classroom is shocked by such speed. Even the Academy's muse, the fat one, doesn't understand. Lucas realizes that the body trembles like that because these guys were the ones who made him give up on living. His anger flared. The boy got back up and reached for Frey's head, trying to slap him, but Frey released a burst of energy, and without even taking his hands from his pockets, sent him flying again. He crashed through several wooden chairs. Now the bully was red-faced, bruised, exhausted, and totally confused. Frey had beaten him without using a single spell chant. Whispers spread fast. People said Frey seemed like a completely different person. Realizing he'd made a scene in front of a bunch of kids, Frey felt a little embarrassed. The whole class had frozen. He tried to quietly slip back out of attention. David was too scared to speak. He could only watch. No one could believe weak little Frey had done all this. The red-haired girl kept watching him closely. Then a voice asked what was going on. It was Professor Dio just arriving. Jack had passed out cold. Professor Dio walked over to check him and found traces of mana still left in his body. That discovery shocked him. He couldn't believe someone this gifted was in the class. Looking around, he wondered which student had done it. Dio took Jack away and confirmed he was only unconscious. Professor Kevin took over the lesson. The students exchanged uneasy looks as class was about to start. Professor Kevin quickly noticed all the girls in the room. Seeing they were the majority, this was the best class already. Then his eyes settled on Isabel, quietly reading. A moment later, he noticed someone else. Frey was there too, also reading a book. One girl whispered that she hated this professor because he turned into a gross pig whenever he looked at women. He walked up to Frey, who watched him carefully. It was odd seeing the boy in class at all, since he barely ever came. Frey wasn't sure how to answer. Kevin first assumed he was a serious student, then remembered he was always absent. With a smile, Frey apologized and said he'd been very busy. The girls whispered that it was pathetic, especially since he only got bullied whenever he did show up. Curious, the professor asked what could be more important than his class. Frey dodged the question and said he was living the peak of his youth. The girls tried not to laugh. Kentevit thought it was nonsense, though he wasn't the type to act like his subject was all that mattered. He asked if Frey had been studying properly. He decided to test him. If Frey couldn't answer, he'd pay for acting bold in class. The quiz started. First question, name the 3 items used by the magic warrior, King Kassadin. Frey's eyes narrowed. Instead of replying, he asked the professor to repeat it. He hadn't caught the name clearly, but it sounded very familiar. 4,000 years ago, there had been a hero, strong, fearless, with mysterious powers that amazed everyone. He trained in martial arts with unmatched focus. His energy could tear down whole forests, causing quakes and destruction wherever he went. He could even reshape the land itself, and never seemed to get tired. One day, his friend joked that if he didn't stop, there'd be no mountains left. That friend carrying a bag over his shoulder was Lucas Trayman. It had been some time since he'd last seen Kassadin. The day was calm, and Lucas watched his friends still training. Kassadin didn't stop, even with a guest there. He just said he'd made tea, and Lucas could pour himself some. As they drank, Lucas asked if he'd ever thought about getting married. Kassadin paused for a moment, then he teased Lucas, saying he'd never understand a woman's heart. To love a woman, he said, could shake a man to his core. Anyone with a weak mind would fall to temptation. Kassadin believed a warrior had to stay firm as stone around women. That wasn't exactly how mages saw things. Lucas studied his friend, and Kassadin quietly looked back. After a while, Lucas joked he'd date a rock if it was pretty enough. The memory hit Frey so hard he started crying. He realized his friend, the magic warrior King Kassadin, had become famous after all these years. Professor Kevin had no idea why the student reacted like that. The rest of the class just argued over whether the question was too hard. Isabel could tell the professor only asked it to show off and embarrass Frey. Then a voice politely asked to interrupt. Isabel said the question had nothing to do with magical history. Class was stunned by how bold she was. Even Frey noticed she spoke like a soldier, despite how delicate she looked. The professor focused on her. At once, his deck's expression tightened. She argued that Kassadin was a warrior who only used mana to support training. He shouldn't be treated as a mage. Then she waited nervously for his answer. Kevin walked up the steps toward her and stopped beside her desk. He asked if student Isabel was insulting everyone who chose the path of a magic warrior. Shaken, that wasn't what she meant. The whole class watched in silence. Frey took it as an insult too, remembering Kassadin hated being called a mage. The professor let out a strained laugh and said, "This might turn into an interesting discussion." He put a hand on her shoulder and told both of them to come to his office. But Isabel quickly pushed his hand away. That caught him completely off guard. He hadn't expected a student to defy him so openly. Isabel could see no easy way out. He pressed her to answer in Frey's place. Someone spoke first. The words Tiger King's glove and giant's belt made the professor freeze. He slowly turned toward the speaker. It was Frey calmly saying Kassadin used only those 3 items. He almost started talking about how he and Kassadin used to be friends, then stopped and asked if he'd said something strange. The professor admitted, through gritted teeth, that the answer was correct. Frey proudly said there was no way he'd miss a question like that. To everyone else, he seemed especially odd today. Kevin then turned back to Isabel and said her behavior was disrespectful. He grabbed her wrist and ordered her to come with him to his office. She froze, not knowing what to do. Frey watched the whole thing, then stepped in with something Kassadin used to say. He repeated that loving a woman could shake a man to his core. Kassadin also said a warrior should stay firm as stone before women, or a weak-minded man would give in to temptation and become nothing more than an animal. The professor hated being interrupted and didn't get the point, so he snapped that maybe Kassadin was wrong. Frey glanced down and noticed the professor was still standing solidly on both feet. Then Kevin caught the insult and rage flooded his face. He shouted Frey's name and fumed at the boy's nerve. That was when Isabel realized Frey had defended her. Now, Professor Kevin focused fully on the student who had grown bold after one right answer. He warned that Frey would regret it if he failed the rest of the quiz. Frey calmly waited for the next question. Meanwhile, the professor was sweating hard. The students could only stare in shock. Frey answered every question with ease. Even on the Age of Light, his knowledge was unbelievable. When the bell rang, Frey was just glad it was finally lunch. He called out to Professor Kevin, and after saying he'd had fun, asked if there were more questions because he was starving. Kevin couldn't understand how this brat knew so much about events from 4,000 years ago. Frey's face gave nothing away. The professor only grew more frustrated, sweat running down his forehead. In the end, he dismissed class and kept thinking about what had happened. Isabel was just as stunned. Outside the academy, Frey walked along happily, even humming to himself. Then Isabel asked if he was going to lunch. She had come up behind him, but he didn't answer. Looked at him with pity. Frey turned away and ignored her, but she kept following anyway, so they ended up walking, one behind the other. Frey soon noticed. He turned and asked why she was trailing him. He also found her formal way of speaking annoying. That came from her family. Soon the students headed into the cafeteria. Lunch was being served. Isabel was shocked by how much Frey could eat. He casually said he hadn't eaten in 4,000 years. Still, he didn't explain much more. Isabel apologized for following him and said there wasn't anywhere else she wanted to sit. Then, she asked how he knew so much about the Age of Light. History said that era got its name from the dazzling powers of the 4 great masters. While chewing, he became interested. He realized that after 4,000 years, magic hadn't advanced at all. It had gotten worse. He wondered if the demigod had something to do with it. Across from him, the girl ate in silence as he explained that the 4 great masters were Kassadin, Psychic Warrior, Schweizer Wilsman, the Sage, Iris Peacefounder, the Dark Witch, and Lucas Trauman. She lit up at Lucas's name and called him an amazing man. Then she joked that if he were still alive, she'd ask her mother to marry him. Frey burst out laughing at her comment. He couldn't believe someone that young was already talking about marriage. Amused and a little flattered, he politely rejected the offer. Meanwhile, other students were watching them talk. Rumours had already spread that Isabel followed him earlier. She was known as the Academy's second-best student, and even crazy David had a crush on her. Right then, David showed up after hearing his name. Others quickly backed away from him while Frey and Isabel kept talking. David couldn't believe what he was seeing. As she cut a sausage, Isabel asked about Professor Kevin's last question. Frey kept eating while explaining that Schweizer's training methods were assimilation, development, and conflict. She said she'd only ever learned the first 2. She set a hand on the table and asked him to teach her about conflict. Taking another bite of bread, Frey asked what level she was. Isabel had reached the 3rd degree of magic. He was impressed someone her age had made it that far. She pointed out that he talked like an old man, licking his plate clean. He said he'd lived a very long time. To her, though, they were still the same age. In a way, she was both right and wrong. After finishing the mountain of food, Frey said he was finally full. He got up with the dishes, still without saying if he'd teach her conflict. He told her he didn't know it in any formal way, from experience, so she should read books instead. That meant he couldn't teach it properly. Hearing that he had actual experience shocked her even more. She couldn't understand how a boy his age knew so much about magic. As he walked off with the plates, she kept wondering who he really was. Later, the students had magic dual class. To keep things fair, everyone was limited to first-degree spells. David was thrilled about it, and even more annoyed seeing Frey get closer to Isabel. He couldn't understand why she talked to Frey so much. The teacher warned them this would be treated like a real fight, so they needed to take it seriously. Frey paid close attention to the teacher. Her name was Jane. He was totally taken by her beauty. Isabel protested, saying it was wrong to act like that around a 40-year-old teacher. But he kept going on about how beautiful she was, even saying she had the perfect woman's body. Isabel was stunned that even his taste in women seemed old-fashioned. First duel was David versus Frey. The two faced each other, ready to fight. Frey stepped forward slowly, grinning. David said he could hardly wait and held out his hand. Frey ignored him and turned away. Something about him felt different. He didn't seem like the same boy David used to bully. Then the students gasped as Frey grabbed Professor Jane by the waist and praised her looks. When she froze in shock, he told her not to worry. He might look young, but inside he was older than her. He asked her out to dinner that night. Jane struggled to get free and told him to return to his place. Frey made a bet. If he won, she had to have dinner with him. No one thought he could pull it off since he was only 1st degree and David was 3rd degree. Sure, He would lose. Jane accepted the bet. Now they had a deal. His words left her flustered. Her cheeks turned pink, and she quickly tried to calm herself down. Her heart shouldn't be racing because of a boy. Now face to face, David asked if Frey had gone crazy. He kept trying to get under his skin, thinking this was all just a trick to make the teacher cancel the match. Anger and hate were clear in his eyes. He kept mocking Frey, who didn't react. David said he'd rip out his vocal cords, then break every bone in his body. This would be Frey's last day walking normally, but Frey showed no fear at all. As far as he remembered, first-degree spells couldn't do that much damage. Still, David acted like he could do anything. At Professor Jane's signal, the fight began. Both boys held their ground. David opened with Stone Fury. Large rocks rose from the ground and a huge stone arrow formed in the air. The students were shocked that he could use Stone Fury. Isabel was stunned, too. Jane had said only first-degree spells were allowed. David hadn't actually broken the rules. The red-haired girl demanded to know how a spell like that was allowed. David said it was a skill only a direct family heir could use, then activated vision magic. Even though it was powerful, first-degree mage could still use it. His family treated vision magic as a symbol of power, but he used it just to bully people. Pointing the stone arrows at Frey, he decided his opponent was scared. Frey brushed it off and said those spells were nothing. He cast magic missile with one hand. The crowd went silent in shock, including Isabel. The colour of the spell shone brilliantly. David laughed. Sure, magic missile couldn't beat Stone Fury. He sent the stone arrow at Frey, and in a single clash, destroyed every stone and blasted David away at terrifying speed. The force threw him through the air. He hit the ground and rolled badly hurt. He started foaming at the mouth. The students were left speechless. Even Professor Jane was drawn in by Frey's power. He seemed to have grown a lot. Meanwhile, David screamed in pain, unable to speak because his throat was injured. The sight was horrifying. Nearby, one student still held a stone in his hand. They had only come to watch a C-class practice match. Frey said David was shaming his family by using vision magic so shamelessly in a duel. David tried to talk, but only drool ran from his mouth. Remembering David's threat to tear out his vocal cords, Frey gave a faint smile. The glowing sphere appeared again to do its job. David had promised to crush his bones one by one, and Frey was ready to return the favour. Knowing he'd lost, David wanted to beg for mercy, but no words came out because of the damage. With a light touch, Frey fired the spear again. It struck David's leg. He screamed in agony, realising how doomed he was. The bones in his right leg were shattered completely. Even then, Frey kept walking toward him, saying this was David's own plan. Isabel covered her mouth. Seeing the violence go too far, Professor Jane turned and ordered the duel stopped at once, naming Frey the winner, but David had never surrendered. Frey reminded her that she'd said to treat this like a real battle and that there were no timeouts on a battlefield. Isabel couldn't understand the teacher's logic. Powerless, she lowered her head. Frey's eyes changed colour, showing his anger. David had enjoyed hurting others, but now it was his turn. Frey said mages like him were why the world had become such a mess. For everyone's sake, he should never use magic again. Step by step, Frey came closer. Then he said he was joking. He wouldn't break every bone. Out of pity, he'd end it there. David cried even harder, relieved for a moment, but Frey turned back and said it still wasn't over. David had one leg left, so he'd use magic missile on that one too. Watching the sphere form again, David's eyes filled with despair. The power in Frey's hand kept growing. David tried to scream, but no sound came out. From afar, others quietly watched Frey's power. One blonde student paid close attention before turning away and leaving. Elsewhere, 2 more people studied the arena. The story spread through the academy fast. People said Frey crushed David in a duel and ruined his vocal cords and legs. Most secretly thought David was an idiot, and the academy was better off without him. Still, they couldn't believe the Blake family's trash had actually won. They even guessed he'd made a deal with the devil. As Frey walked through the halls, a man stopped him. Frey didn't know him, so he asked his name. The boy introduced himself as E-Man Milo, a 4th-year student. Once he learned he was an upperclassman, Frey introduced himself too. They traded sharp looks. Then Yaiman directly offered him a place in the Tramon Rings. Hearing that name stirred something in Frey. By now he already knew about the group. Straight, it was a student organisation that represented West Arrow Academy, and not just anyone could join. They chose members carefully. The rune ring on Iman's hand proved he belonged to the Tramon Rings. Frey, meanwhile, was mostly wondering if using his name without permission counted as invading his privacy. He listened while the student kept talking. Before Yaiman could even say he was the group's leader, Frey turned away. He had no interest in joining them. Voice then said, That boy wouldn't be easy to convince. It was Perun Jun standing in the hallway. Ayman greeted his imposing companion. Hearing the name, Frey paid attention. The newcomer stepped forward and introduced himself as the group's leader. He apologized for Ayman's behavior and said his friend had still told the truth about the Traman rings. Frey just stared at him in silence. He started paying real attention to the boy in front of him. For someone that young, he looked like a strong leader. Still, Frey had no interest in joining. He walked off saying he wouldn't charge them for using his name. Dooman got furious at how cocky he was, but Payan told him to let it go. Scratching his head, his friend apologized for the outburst. Meanwhile, the blue-eyed boy watched him go. That night, guests started arriving. Dinner was already prepared. The professor had promised to eat with Frey, though Isabel being there felt odd. While they ate, Isabel casually said to ignore her and pretend she wasn't there. Annoyed, Frey told her to leave. She only shrugged and brought up the conflict method, making the professor listen closely. Since Frey hadn't taught her yet, Isabel figured the best plan was to stay near him, interested. Professor Jane asked if she meant Schweizer's training method. Isabel was surprised the professor knew about it too. Jane took a sip of her drink and said she'd only heard rumours from other warriors. She had searched the records many times and found nothing. She realised Frey knew something. She wanted to hear more. Frey quietly drank from his cup. Then, a man came to the table, and a sudden touch startled the professor. Frey stood behind her, hugged her, and said he could teach her something even more interesting. He wanted to continue the talk in his room. The professor felt drawn to him, though she hesitated because he was only 20. It was like her mind and body weren't working together. Right before they kissed, Isabel slammed the table and told Frey to stop acting shameless with the professor. The moon hung high overhead. By the balcony, Frey thought about his new life. If the demigod truly ruled the world, that made him a serious threat. Even after 4,000 years, the people still remembered Kassadine, Schweizer, Iris and him. That meant his legacy was still alive and people were still fighting for it. Isabel quietly walked over. He was so lost and thought he didn't notice. She just stared at him with wide eyes. A moment later, Frey met her gaze and asked her something. He wanted to know who ran the academy. More than that, he wanted the strongest person among the students, professors and staff. Before answering, she complained that he never answered her questions. He promised he would if she told him who the boss was. Excited, she celebrated with little hand motions. She said the strongest student was Perun Jun, and among the professors, it was Professor Dio Pulsman and Professor Adelia. But overall, strongest was probably her aunt. Her aunt was the head mistress of Westerat Academy, Madame Cyrus Tristan. Professor Jane then joined them. She explained that Cyrus was a famous 6th-degree mage with a cold personality. Frey could feel how overwhelming that rank was. In theory, mages could reach the 9th degree, but no one had done it for over 3,000 years. Some even doubted it was possible, saying the true limit was 8th degree. Fewer than 10 mages had ever reached that, so 9th degree was basically a legend. Frey looked around and asked if the headmistress had also cast the spell protecting the academy. Professor Jane wasn't sure, but said it was possible. Frey understood he couldn't take on a 6th-degree mage yet. Then he remembered the offer from the Traman rings. Feeling that something was off, he decided he needed to meet Cyrus Tristan. He turned to his new friend and called her over. His expression softened as he thought about the favour he was about to ask, because dragging an innocent child into this might be a bad idea. His goal was to reach at least the 7th degree. The professor told him that would take 10 years, even if he was fast. Frey replied that he'd get there before the vacation ended. Jane laughed and said big dreams were nice to have, but he meant every word. He noticed the professor was alone. He walked up and tried flirting again. Isabel, annoyed, reminded him she was still there. She warned that if a teacher got caught with a student, her aunt would have words with them. That instantly killed his plans. It was exactly why he disliked little kids. So, Professor Jane agreed and left, which only irritated Isabel more. The lamps lit the night. Frey knew he didn't need to rush. He just had to avoid mistakes. Looking up at the moon, he chose the fastest path. 2 weeks later, everyone came in limping. David was back at school looking for Frey. He still refused to accept losing, saying there was no way Trash like Frey could beat him. Everyone in the hall heard him yelling. Meanwhile, Frey calmly read his book, red-faced with rage. David swore he'd make him regret being born. He said he'd turn Frey's life into hell. But before he finished, Frey fired a magic missile and knocked him down. David's crutches flew as he hit the floor. The other students watched in fear. Now his nose was broken too. Later in class, Professor Kevin said David had gone home to fix it. Bored, Frey wandered the halls. He thought students at prestigious Westerat Academy should at least act with some class to learn how to use mana straight from his body. He needed real combat. Someone called out, "Hey, gay-haired guy." A boy behind him said they'd heard Frey was good with magic. In a damaged room, the boy introduced himself as Alex Dreamid, an upperclassman who clearly expected Frey to be impressed. Without any fear, he bragged that he could crush the skinny kid in front of him without breaking a sweat. Angry, he demanded to know what Frey had done to David, whom he called his little brother. Frey didn't look concerned at all. He wondered if these idiots were bothering him on purpose. Demanding respect, the senior raised his hand. To Frey, they were just spoiled brats. Dream kept asking why Frey had fought his friend. As he bragged about placing 17th in the last Glade Heed Magic tournament, Frey yawned. At last, the senior tried to scare him by saying this would be his funeral day. To Frey, it was just a loudmouth threatening a freshman to look cool in front of his friends. Those boys were only there to watch. There was no need to gang up on someone they thought was weak, especially when Frey was already making a magic missile. It struck 3 students at once while Alex was blasted far back. Frey's power could drop several people in one shot. That only made them angrier. Alex lay on the floor without moving. Others complained it wasn't fair to attack while someone was talking, but to Frey, messing with spoiled brats was funny. Their attacks got even fiercer because of his attitude. Golbor's first son of the Gillard family wanted to crush him. The second son of the Pinnelark family joined in too. Even so, Frey wasn't intimidated. He raised his hands and fired a second magic missile. As the students rushed him, he kept building more energy and dropping them one after another. Even a simple motion made a strong missile. In the end, he sat on a pile of worn-out bodies, thinking the whole thing had been a waste of time. With a scoff, he decided none of them were worth the effort. Clouds drifted over the academy. Frey had been studying so much to improve his techniques that he fell asleep from exhaustion. Then, someone asked what he'd been doing lately. He turned and saw Isabel. Students had started calling him the Deadly Missile because he kept dropping people with magic missile. The nickname embarrassed him badly, but he still hadn't had a chance to use stronger spells. Isabel was startled by the strange feeling she had for him. Seeing him resting on the desk, she couldn't stop staring. Without lifting his face from the table, he asked what she wanted. She said she had followed his advice. She already knew true blood could improve magic circles, but mixing it with magical essence in a 7:3 ratio was new to her. Using Troxo blood would make it even better. Even so, she thanked him for the amazing discovery. After a short pause, she wondered what he would teach her next. Frey looked so tired and bored that he just stared at her. He held his gaze, clearly curious about what he could do. He still hadn't realized he had become Isabel's personal tutor. Since she was gifted, he knew proper teaching could bring her to the 7th degree. He thought it over for a while. Then he called to her and said he'd teach her conflict next. She lit up at once, unable to believe it was finally happening. He told her he would leave the academy during break to train, and she could come watch. He warned the trip would be hard, maybe even deadly. She accepted before he could finish. She truly wanted to learn conflict. No matter what, she was going with him to train. When it was time to leave, she showed up with a huge backpack. Frey couldn't believe how much useless stuff she had packed. Still, he figured women carried all kinds of things he didn't understand. A little nervous, she asked where they were going. Even Frey wasn't fully sure yet. He was thinking about the Hispania Mountains. That place was known as a monster paradise and extremely dangerous. With a map, they searched for the fastest route and estimated the travel time. By ship, it would take about half a day, but the road to the mountains was tricky and full of monsters. Still, Isabel got ready without showing any fear. She had never expected the trip to be easy. Frey frowned at her attitude. As they walked, they talked about teleportation stones for long-distance travel. Those things didn't exist 4,000 years ago. Magic hadn't improved much, but technology had. Even so, traveling huge distances with a stone sounded amazing. The problem was the price. The trip from Cow Symphony to Hispaniola was so far it would cost around 10 gold. Frey checked his bag for money, but only found 1 gold. Still, he had another plan. Isabel was a noble too, like Frey Blake, so he politely asked how much money she had. She brought none. According to her, money makes people lazy, so she left it behind for this training trip. She even said earning travel money was part of the training. Frey was stunned by how shameless she sounded while carrying that giant backpack. Isabel snapped that the two things had nothing to do with each other. Women needed a lot of stuff. They kept going, thinking they'd figure something out once they reached the port. But neither of them had ever worked before. Near the docks, they found the place crowded with sailors and workers. They looked up in shock at the huge wooden ship. It was free for academy students, which explained the crowd of students nearby. The food was also supposed to be excellent. Free was already drooling over the thought of it, but then learned the ship was full, and the next one wouldn't leave for 4 days. He dropped to the ground, sure they'd never make it on time. Their only choice was the Cortez, an older planer ship. Still, they couldn't really complain. That was just how life went. Even with a stop at Jutenbul, it would reach Cow Symphony in under 5 days, and academy students still rode free. Inside, the crew was talking among themselves. Scarface Man said everything was ready. The captain ordered them to sail that night for a perfect raid. Another man with an eye patch laughed. Someone asked why he'd removed his eye, and he said it was the mark of a pirate. Studying a map, he discussed the bloodthirsty pirates. Pointing to a remote area, one of them said their target was the ship stopping at Jutenbul. They'd ambush it after it passed the Oskal Islands. All that was left was the ship's name. It was the Cortez, packed with rich kids. At the front, Frey and Isabel stood at the front of the ship. The captain introduced himself and welcomed everyone aboard. Isabel politely started talking with him. Without this ship, they'd have waited 4 more days, and despite being decent, it had few passengers. The captain explained why the route passed the Oskal Islands, where pirates often appeared. Isabel got nervous, but he quickly reassured her. Only 2 warships escorted them, but each had a 4th degree mage, and both were battle mages from the Magic Tower. So, even if pirates came, they shouldn't be a threat. The 2 mages kept up their protective spells. That helped Isabel relax. If the pirates had any sense, they wouldn't attack. Then Frey noticed something unsettling. The crew was suddenly shaken by the sight of pirates. Giga, a large, heavily armed ship, was heading straight for them. Even Captain Mac was stunned. Isabel stared in panic at what was happening. While Frey stayed calm, the warships had already been sunk. That alone proved these weren't normal pirates. They had huge cannons and serious resolve. A few minutes earlier, the pirates had found their target and seen the Cortez coming. The 2 escort ships worried them, but they had a secret weapon, a special guest for the raid, speaking in a strange language. He showed his power. It was Lord Dullard, a lich helping them attack. His magic terrified even the pirates. He gave off pure darkness and destruction, but the captain trusted him. It was an undead monster, and with a lich on his side, Captain thought he'd make pirate history. The undead began preparing his spell, dark power mixed with shadow magic. His first attack was Ice Spear. He fired at the warships, piercing the hulls to strike the mages in charge. Seeing the attack, 2 mages tried to defend themselves. It was too late. The spears were too strong. They tried everything, but the ice kept tearing through the ships and destroyed them completely. The pirate captain laughed, already dreaming of the riches they'd take that night. His crew drew their swords for battle. As they approached, he tried praising Dullard's spellwork. Then the undead sensed something odd. When he turned, even the captain flinched. Dullard said he had cast 3 ice spears. He couldn't understand why the last ship was still afloat. The captain then remembered he'd asked him not to destroy that one, since the passengers were meant to be hostages. That only annoyed the lich, who snapped and called him a bone-headed brat. He'd attack just hard enough to stop escape and resistance, not to sink the ship. The pirates still looked confused. Dullard told him something about. That ship felt strange. Meanwhile, chaos broke out on the Cortez as students ran across the deck. Off to the side, a mysterious figure sat still. Under a hood, he looked tired and breathed heavily. Frey and Isabel stayed where they were, unsure what to do. Isabel was terrified after seeing the warships wiped out, but Freya's face didn't change. He put a hand on her head and told her to calm down. For now, they were only dealing with pirates. He had bigger concerns. He'd seen 3 ice spears, but the one aimed at their ship vanished mid-air. He knew he hadn't cast any defense spell. He started thinking it through. He had felt the mana, yet couldn't stop it. Then he sensed a presence that reminded him of the demigod's pain, and anger rose in him because he'd been unable to defend himself. He forced himself to focus. It wasn't a demigod. The mana felt undead, but they still didn't know who had protected the ship. With a hand near his lips, he kept thinking, whoever it was, they deserved thanks. Meanwhile, the pirate ship kept closing in. The students ran around in panic. The ships drew side by side, and ladders were thrown across his bridges. Armed pirates rushed aboard. The crew cried for help, not knowing how to fight back. People ran everywhere in total chaos. Bodies started dropping as someone rose to act. The real fight was starting. Cortez was smaller than the Nifla, but it still carried many passengers, about 40 children from wealthy families. Thinking of ransom money, the pirate captain grinned. He greeted them and introduced his crew as the bloodthirsty pirates. The captain of the Cortez drew his sword to face him, but the pirate only saw a treasure chest full of rich heirs. His crew roared with laughter. The insult enraged everyone. Then the pirate noticed someone standing before him, a student who looked helpless. The boy declared the ship was full of model students who would become great mages. In short, this was the wrong ship to attack. The pirate captain saw what he was trying to do as the boy started using magic to defend himself. Before he could finish, something flew at him and slammed him into the wood. The pirate captain had thrown a knife. The boy instantly panicked with the blade lodged by his neck. He shook in fear. Frey and Isabel stood frozen in the chaos. Frey could tell the knife had been aimed at the boy's neck, but its course had changed, feeling the hooded man's presence. He wondered if that was the same person who had protected the ship. A voice then said the young man couldn't stand against the pirate. The figure warned him not to take risks, stay quiet and obey. The pirate captain acted like it had all been a mistake, then decided to stop fooling around. Spotting an easy target, he chose to make an example of him. The boy backed away, trying to protect himself. At Kaya's, he was so scared he wet himself. The captain mocked him for it, calling him a baby. One pirate said he'd handle it. He threw the boy over his shoulder and joked about giving him a bath. The hooded figure told him to stop, but the pirate tossed the boy into the sea. Student struggled to swim and begged for help. He drifted farther from the ship until he vanished from sight. Even though Orko was second degree, he was killed without mercy. The pirates didn't care at all. Enraged, the other students finally attacked with magic. The captain just complained that the kids were too loud. The students launched spell after spell, but something much stronger crushed them. The undead's power was shielding the pirates. It spread everywhere, blocking every attack. Students had no idea how to fight that evil force. The pirate captain only laughed while the undead handled the real work. Using dark magic, he overwhelmed the students. A shadowy force tried to pull them all in. One boy stared in disbelief. He had only read about this in books, a terrifying, powerful lich. Isabel was horrified by the monster, but Frey stayed deep in thought. The pirates had made a deal with an immortal being, but immortals don't bargain with mortals unless they're using them. The pirates, of course, cared only about money. Their greed mattered more than anything. Scared, Isabel grabbed Frey, and he told her to let go because she was making him even hotter. Then he saw her face and froze. She was crying. Now it was clear these weren't normal pirates. Lich was at least 5th degree, which was why the mages on the ship couldn't stop him. The pirate captain turned toward the mysterious figure. Wanting answers, the lich ordered whoever blocked his attack to step forward. He knew that person was somewhere on the ship. That when no one answered, he made a threat. Ice arrows formed in his hand, and he warned that if the person stayed hidden, everyone would die. The crew was terrified. Laughing like a madman, he made the arrows even bigger and deadlier. The captain tried to stop Lord Doulard, reminding him they still needed hostages, but the undead shot him a terrifying glare. Even the captain couldn't meet his eyes. Then someone stepped forward quietly. The hooded man still kept his face hidden, but the lich already suspected he was the one who interfered. With hesitation, the young man admitted it was him. Interested, the lich asked for his name. Then the boy pulled back his hood, and everyone was stunned. Even Isabel looked shocked. Frey, though, seemed oddly detached from it all. The boy introduced himself as Perun June. Isabel recognized him as a classmate from the academy. Everyone knew Perun. He led the academy's biggest club and was the true son of one of the Empire's 3 most powerful families. He also had top grades and often fought Isabel for first place. But this wasn't the time for that. She admitted that while their grades were close, his degree was probably much higher than hers. The girls were amazed to see Perun on the ship. Some even cheered, thinking they might survive. Isabel hoped Perun could handle this, but Frey told her not to expect too much. Blood was dripping from Perun's mouth. He was likely barely standing. The lich was at least 5th degree, and though Perun was gifted, it looked like he had only just reached that level. Surviving a spell stronger than his own was already a miracle. Desperate, Isabel asked if Frey was above the undead's level, but he said no. Even then, he asked her to step back because he still felt overheated. Sharpert, worn out, Perun regretted picking that ship. He had chosen the one with fewer students so he wouldn't stand out, and it turned out to be a huge mistake. He had stopped the spell, but the effort left his body feeling like it might break apart. Facing the creature, he had no idea how to beat it. The undead said this was his lucky day. He hadn't expected to find such fine material. The two locked eyes in silence, thinking death was near. Perun shut his eyes. Someone asked the pirate captain what he really wanted. With a faint smile, he said it was nothing serious. Seeing so many valuable children crossing the dangerous Ocel Islands, they simply couldn't ignore it. So, as friends to all, they would escort them safely to Cow Symphony. One pirate added that the captain was a busy man, but he finished by saying they'd only do it after getting paid for their protection. So, in the end, it was all about money. Perun stood completely still. Then, he made another offer. He would be the only hostage the June family could pay, twice what the pirates expected to make. But the captain refused, saying with an immortal on his side, he could get any amount he wanted. Perun gave a small shrug and admitted he had a point. He wasn't strong enough to beat the lich they hired. Still, he said he'd fight with everything he had and make sure he wouldn't die alone. That answer shocked the captain. Lees found himself genuinely interested in the boy and liked him more for having that kind of spirit at his age. He thought the nation had a bright future ahead, but the undead had no intention of changing his mind. Perun's manner was incredible. Yet, he still turned pale when he understood what the monster wanted. He tried to dodge the dark attacks, but the undead meant to drain all his mana and turn his body into a servant. Using his power, he caught Perun in his claws. At that point, talks were over. The plan was to move everyone to the pirate ship. The students ran in panic, but the pirates seized them by force. They grabbed the girls tightly and wouldn't let go. The pirates looked pleased with themselves until the one-eyed pirate remembered he should help take hostages too. Then he noticed Isabel. He moved toward her, and she shrank behind Frey. The pirate mocked Frey, calling him a twig. Frey glanced around like he didn't know who he meant until he realized the pirate was talking to him. The man mocked him again, this time as a skinny brat. Frey calmly asked for a little respect. That answer really got under the pirate's skin. Cracking his hands, he had to beat Frey down, but Frey didn't budge or obey. By then, some students were already tied up. Jack muttered that fame had gone to Frey's head. The pirate was getting fed up. He stormed toward Frey and charged with his sword ready. Everyone watched closely. With fear all around him, Frey stayed still. The pirate closed in, ready to land the final hit. Isabel shut her eyes, unable to watch, but the one who got smashed and lost teeth was the pirate. Frey blasted him away with his power. The man flew off like rotten fruit. Frey briefly looked at the result. His kick had sent the enemy straight into the sea, leaving everyone stunned, because the one standing there was Frey, the Academy's so-called eternal loser. The blonde boy with blue eyes could only stare, trying to figure out what kind of move that was. He replayed it in his mind, a spinning kick filled with mana before the pirate could even strike. He already knew Frey had talent, but not control this perfect. Back in the moment, Frey stopped the redhead from stepping forward and patted her on the head. He told her to stay sharp. Everyone there was weaker than her except the lich, so she could protect herself just fine, right? The mage gave him a small smile and touched her head. Then she focused again, while Frey faced the pirates. One of the kidnappers asked what had just happened. Then he mocked it, saying his friend only lost because he got distracted by a pretty girl. In the next instant, the gay-haired boy was in front of him, moving so fast he stirred the air. The pirate couldn't even process that speed. From the back, the lich watched in silence, studying Frey and clearly surprised. Then Aura burst out with a loud explosion. Still confused, the pirate groaned in pain. Frey had struck him dead, and coldly said they should never have taken that deal. He didn't like this arrangement, and he wasn't going to play nice anymore. For a second, Frey noted that he'd never killed before, but it no longer mattered as everyone stared in shock. Men like that were never going to like someone like him anyway. All the pirates rushed the grey-haired boy with loud cries. Frey met them with a cold stare, grabbed the fallen man by the neck, flung him into two others. Then he followed up with an aura attack that tore through everyone ahead of him. The pirates, still standing, tried to circle around and hit him from behind, but in a blink, Frey spread his aura and crushed them too. The man beside the lich could only call it impossible. Meanwhile, Frey kept taking the pirates down one after another. The students watched in stunned awe at the huge gap in power. One pirate tried to save himself by grabbing a girl hostage and begging for mercy. Frey rushed him instantly, so fast it looked like he left after images. One kick sent the pirate flying over the girl and smashed him right in the mouth. The others tried to surround Frey, but he jumped up and made them crash into each other instead. Angry, they yelled that they dragged him to the bottom of the sea, but when they looked up, the grey-haired boy was holding a huge sphere of energy. They panicked and begged him to stop, but he fired it with a cold face and without a word. Screams were the last thing heard, and then only dust and scorch marks remained. Frey, slowly, dropped back down. Then he noticed one pirate had survived. The man was holding the mage hostage and called Frey a monster. He warned Frey not to move, or he'd hurt her. Frey stared at him for a second and flatly asked what he had just said. The bald pirate blinked in confusion, and before he realized it, the mage was already charging an attack. She looked straight into his eyes and released a huge electric shock that swallowed them both. One blast was enough to drop him. The crew around them fell silent, too stunned to speak. The Lich and the redhead beside him were just as shocked. The mage and Frey looked at each other for a moment until the redhead asked what he thought of her skills. Frey dryly said she acted sweet and harmless for someone that dangerous. Then applause rang out, and the clapping from behind made the hero turn. It was the thug beside the Lich, slow clapping and mocking their strength. Even so, he admitted he was actually impressed. The hero and villain locked eyes for a brief moment. Then the villain broke the silence with an offer. He said the boy was clearly no ordinary mage, but handling the whole ship alone would still be hard. The gay-haired boy stayed silent and let him talk. The villain said he only wanted just half of the trainees. Hero glanced at the captives. One was crying for his mother while others sobbed, begging not to be taken. The villain asked if he'd take the deal, save some people, and leave alive, calling it a win-win. The hero asked how that was a win-win when most of the enemy force was already gone. The villain only shrugged and sneered. He said the grey-haired boy could choose who stayed and who got handed over. A blonde woman suddenly ran up, begging to be picked. She tried throwing herself at him, desperate to be saved. If money wasn't enough, she offered other kinds of payment, promising she'd do anything he wanted. Another trainee dropped to his knees and begged too. Soon more joined in, offering money to buy their lives. The grey-haired boy dryly said he had no choice and told Isabel to collect the payments, but Isabel snapped that he couldn't seriously do that. Hearing her protest, he smirked and joked about starting an auction, which only made her matter. The crowd kept crying, digging, and swarming around him, while the others could only watch in silence. Frey finally asked if they were done yet. Then he shoved the blonde away, saying she was too clingy and smelled like rotten fish. He called them rats. All they'd learned was how to use money to get their way. They lived off their parents' hard-earned rewards and used that to push others around, hardly worthy of being called mages. A mage, he said, is supposed to protect the weak. A real mage saves others before himself, and that only made the girl admire him more. Then he ruined the moment by bringing up payment again, making the redhead lose it. Meanwhile, the villains watched from a distance. The red-haired one glanced at the Lich, wondering why he was so quiet. Was he doubting he could beat that boy? The Lich replied that no human was beyond his power. The redhead froze, shocked that the Lich had read his thoughts, then quickly straightened up. The undead said he had only been observing, and the villain silently decided to guard his thoughts better. The monster kept studying Frey, sensing a kind of mana he'd never felt before, and judging him a skilled fighter. Still, he was only a 5-star mage, so the Lich decided the human couldn't truly face him. Shauna released his power, ripping through his cloak. The redhead beside him praised Lord Doulard with full confidence. The heroes watched the monster's power rise. The undead said he'd beaten countless men like this before and ordered the mage to surrender and become his. The gay-haired boy stayed calm and said the monster talked too much. The Lich immediately cast another spell, creating purple spear-like missiles. The red-haired girl was startled by the spell, but before she could speak, the Lich fired at the heroes. The protagonist simply stepped aside, and the attack nearly struck pirates nearby. But the missiles curved in midair and came back for another hit. The mage warned Frey not to relax. The spell would keep chasing him. He dodged again like it was nothing, saying he already understood the trick. Watching nearby, the red-haired boy thought the spell was dangerous. Those missiles would keep tracking their target even if Dullard cast something else. And right after that, the Lich used bone hands. Magic spread across the deck, and skeletal hands rose from below. The hero kept evading the missiles, but the hands caught him off guard from behind. The villain started celebrating, as if the fight was already over, while the girl softly called Frey's name. She screamed it as explosions erupted from the Lich's magic. The blast grew stronger, forcing the mage to shield herself and the others with a barrier. Everyone nearby scrambled to avoid the leftover attacks. The redhead kept the barrier up until she looked toward the center and realized the protagonist was gone. Only broken parts of the ship remained there. She called out for him, begging for an answer. The blonde mage had already started mourning. Then, without warning, Lich's missiles stopped in mid-air. The undead was stunned and quickly looked around. His own missiles were now pointed back at him. He hurriedly raised a repulsion shield to block them, but that broke his focus, and the mage he was holding with magic slipped free. It didn't matter. He gathered another dark spell in his hands and blasted the remaining missiles apart. He couldn't understand it. How had the boy turned his own magic back on him? He thought the fight was over until the gay-haired boy appeared behind him. Everyone watching was shocked to see Frey standing there, completely unharmed. The Lich spun around, unable to understand it, but no matter how he moved, the hero stayed at his back, using speed alone to toy with him. Panicking, the monster jumped into the air to get away. Lich was rattled, trying to figure out how this was even possible. Humans weren't supposed to move like that, but the protagonist only stared up at him, magic shining in his eyes with total confidence. The girl asks if Frey is okay. He answers with a calm look and a small nod. She stares at him in awe and remembers a vision of another mage who looked a lot like him. The pieces start coming together, and she begins to understand. Then the villain started charging another spell, frightening the blonde boy nearby. The Lich unleashed a rain of giant ice spears at the ship. The crew looked up in terror, sure it was over. The Lich decided destroying the ship was the only way to save himself, so he kept bombarding it, willing to sacrifice everyone if he had to. Then something stopped him cold. Every attack was blocked with ease. Frey had raised a massive barrier around the ship. The undead could only stare and call it impossible. The blonde boy said it really was. He'd cough blood trying to stop even one spear. Meanwhile, the girl kept wondering who Frey really was. Above them, the monster called him a mere human while forming a huge iceberg to hurl at the ship. The blonde boy shouted that nothing could block something that big. Trip roaring for the humans to die, the Lich hurled the massive ice down like a meteor. The protagonist answered by leaping up, charging straight through the giant spear and splitting it in half. He kept rising until he was face to face with the monster. The younger mages on the ship blocked the falling debris. The Lich couldn't believe it, ranting that a mere 5-star mage couldn't have stopped him. The gay-haired boy said he simply knew the path he had to walk. The undead shouted back, asking if he truly knew what lay beyond 5 stars. Frey mocked him, saying he'd need to try harder because those spells meant nothing here. Shaken, the Lich asked who he really was. The hero first introduced himself as Frey Blake, the Academy's eternal loser, and the name alone terrified the monster. Then he declared he was Lucas Trommen returned, after 4,000 years, the strongest mage in history. The mages on the ship complained they could barely keep up while still trying to stay focused. The girl looked up in worry. That, in disbelief, the monster said that was impossible. Lucas was dead. Then he lunged forward with one hand in a direct attack. Frey appeared behind him, mocked that he looked better from the back, and struck. His hand pierced past the monster's body and grabbed its blue heart. The protagonist said he knew exactly what it was and asked if the Lich still planned to keep living. He added that he guessed where the core would be, though the type made it harder to know for sure. The monster screamed for him to wait. Frey crushed the stone, and a huge blast followed. The monster broke apart and vanished into the air, leaving the mage floating there, watching with a stern face. The mages on the ship were stunned by how fast it ended, and the pirates began mourning their defeat. The red-haired villain kept asking how any of this was possible. Then Frey appeared behind him, making it clear he already knew what came next. There would be no more deals. Every pirate on that ship was going down. Time later, all the pirates had been defeated, including the redhead, who ended up in the worst shape of all. The hero stood among the fallen bodies, finishing it all with one final downward strike. After that, he turned and saw the apprentices staring from a distance, especially the red-haired mage who looked at him in awe. By dawn, they reach a port. Frey gets off the ship with the girl, but a blonde boy stops him and praises his skill. He even says he's a huge fan. He just keeps walking, and Isabel is confused by how cold he is. But then the boy steps up, bows, thanks him, and says he'll repay him for saving his life. The girl quickly tells Pri he doesn't need to bow like that. Frey watches in surprise, then quietly relaxes. Praxans? He asks how the boy feels since the shockwave could have hurt him. The blonde says he's fine, because he had prepared for that kind of thing. Frey finds that funny, and the girl tells him not to be rude. The three walk through the city as Preth asks what happened to Frey. He wants to know how Frey beat the Lich so easily when that should be impossible for a normal mage. He says he's heard of him before, the Academy's most talentless student, and asks if Frey had been hiding his real power the whole time. Frey answers dryly that it's hard to say. Life can surprise you. The two stare at each other in silence until the blonde shrugs and breaks the tension. He agrees that anything can happen while the girl follows behind them, After all that, Pry invites Frey to his home so he can thank him properly. The formal offer leaves Isabella speechless and blushing as she waits for Frey's answer. Frey says he'll think about it if he has time. That makes his companion furious. How could he brush off a noble's invitation? Once Frey gets the idea, he changes his tune and says he might go if there's something to gain. Isabella gets even madder, calling him a bastard, while Frey has no clue why. She yells that asking for money is shameless. He shoots back that they're broke because of her. In the middle of it, the blonde says he doesn't mind, but asks why they need money. Frey explains he needs to use the Casanfini portal stone and it's expensive, making Pri curious. The boy gets an idea and digs through his bag, pulling out gold coins as payment for saving him. 3 gold coins, 300 others, which makes the pair instantly happy. Frey says they only need 20 gold, but the noble insists they keep all of it. That makes Frey think a little worn out that the kid really is a spoiled rich boy. They keep walking and talking with the blonde inviting Frey over again. He lists reason after reason, and Frey starts getting tired of it. When Frey finally snaps, Prit says he was only being polite and mentions that his father handles everything himself, but something catches Frey's attention and he asks if the boy has an older sister. The blonde says yes, she's in the kingdom of Luonable, but Frey only cares about the girl, which annoys the redhead behind him. Pry says his sister comes from a family known for raising strong warriors, and they'd probably be disappointed that he's not great at magic. Isabella tells him not to think like that, because he's stronger than he believes. Then Frey grabs the boy's attention and tells him not to lose confidence, because such a handsome guy is here to help, making Prith flustered. But Frey ruins it right away by saying to contact him if he has an older sister or even an aunt, which sends Isabella over the edge. She starts shouting at him, calling him a total pervert. The blonde takes a breath for a few seconds and then suddenly laughs. He says it has been a long time since he laughed like that and calls the two of them funny friends. Time passes and by late afternoon that day, the blonde says it's time for him to leave. He invites them to his home one more time, saying he won't feel right until he repays them. Freezy again says he'll go if he has time, and the redhead gets annoyed all over again. They trade looks for a moment, quietly waiting to part ways. Isabella says she takes that as a good sign. They say their goodbyes, and Free thinks the boy could become a good friend. Free says the kid was nice the way nobles should be. His companion agrees, until Free adds that he also has very deep pockets. That annoys the redhead again. Free has no idea why she's angry this time either, and when she blows up, he says it's not his fault he's broke. The next day, Isabella tries on all kinds of outfits and armor, including a flashy mage set, and asks Free if she looks pretty. Free answers that he just wants to go home, then tells her to pick practical clothes instead of frilly stuff that will get in the way, leaving her flustered. The redhead starts getting annoyed, then yells that she's just happy to finally wear good clothes, while Free still doesn't get why she's upset. The shop worker says her companion seems to like simpler clothes, and Free starts thinking he should never have brought her. Later, near the edge of the city, the group sets out again with new gear. Free says that no matter how many times he sees it, that item is still amazing. The magic subspace bag, which uses magic to hold way more inside than it should. The girl says it's not that special. When Free asks if she's being dramatic, she says it doesn't matter now. Free takes a breath and thinks over everything. He looks around and notes that, like the portal stones, the world has advanced and the population has grown. Then he realizes that's obvious. That he's been gone for 4,000 years. He suspects the demigod used to hold human progress back. To the gods, humans are probably just ants. Isabel asks what he's thinking about and says they've already reached the portal stone. Frey scratches his cheek, still thinking, says he'll figure that out on his own. A man announces that the portal is opening and tells everyone to step into the magic circle. Frey is surprised they can run separate groups like this. Reincarnates is. He's impressed by how the portal works while the girl tells him to stop embarrassing her there. A magic circle forms overhead and spreads wider. Frey warns her that first-timers often get sick, and she snaps that she already knows. The portal activates, giving everyone a strange feeling, and they're carried through a tunnel-like space until the trip ends. Trey looks up in surprise as they arrive at Hispa. He studies the land and thinks that even after 4,000 years, some things never change. He turns to ask where they should go next, but finds Isabel vomiting from portal sickness. She insists it's only because she skipped breakfast and says food will fix it, while Frey thinks he really shouldn't have brought her. Not far away, several men are drinking in a tavern, and the bartender notices something. His attention shifts as Frey bursts in demanding food and a drink, shocking the redhead when he orders alcohol. She yells that drinking that is totally irresponsible. Frey tells her to be quiet. She has no idea how long it's been since he had a drink. He also says he still doesn't get why the academy doesn't sell alcohol, leaving Isabel speechless. Then she starts yelling again that the reason is obvious while Frey argues. Everyone starts drinking at 13 anyway. The bartender brings their order and asks if they're mercenaries. Frey ignores him and lights up when the food arrives. The bartender says that if they're here, they must be rookies, especially dressed in brand new gear like they're going after a dragon. Frey keeps eating and says nothing. The bald man says that's not all bad. Rich kids should enjoy being young, but warns them to eat and head back because rookies shouldn't challenge the mountains. Isabel says she heard the place is packed with dangerous monsters. It only makes the bartender mad, and he says she has no idea what she's talking about. She gets startled while the other adventurers laugh nearby at the thought of them taking on the mountains. Frey ignores all of it and keeps stuffing himself. Then the bartender apologizes, saying he has a son around their age. He explains the boy once trained to be a mercenary, which is why he spoke up. Isabel asks where his son is now. The old man says he's gone. He tried to enter the mountain. He apologizes, but he says it's fine. He brought it up himself. The old man goes on saying his son was escorting a mother and daughter, and only the daughter came back alone, saying his son wasn't returning. The bartender says he's not trying to insult them, but entering the mountain is a bad idea. They might never come back. Isabel has no words after hearing that story. Then Frey breaks the silence, still eating, like nothing happened, and says the food is great. After that, they ask the old man what kind of monsters live in the mountain. The redhead takes a bite, too, wanting to see if Frey is right, and finds out the food is actually awful. The old man asks Frey if he really plans to go into the mountain, even knowing he might never return. Frey says nothing. The bartender gets it and mutters that he's going to lose sleep over this. Still, once they finish eating, he pulls out a map and points at it. Isabel says she already had a plan, but this helps more than she expected. Frey asks what they owe for all the food and drinks, then thanks him. The old man says not to worry yet. It's on the house for now. They can pay him later as long as they come back alive. Frey asks how he stays in business if he gives in that easily. The old man says he hears that a lot. Later that night, Frey thanks him for the meal while they leave, and the bartender calls him a liar. His food is terrible, but the drinks are good. He says goodbye, tells them he'll remember them, and promises better sausages next time. Frey says he's looking forward to it. The old man sends them off with a bright smile. Then the two continue on, heading into the forest on the way to the mountains. Deep in the night, fierce battle rages as blue lightning bursts from a warrior strike. The blow rips through the area and shakes the ground. A red-haired woman watches from a distance, judging the fight carefully. Beside her, a white-haired man stays silent and unreadable. Around them, fighters keep clashing across the ruined battlefield. One warrior says the enemy is trying to stop their advance. The other answers that they'll force their way through if they have to. Their talk turns urgent as they quickly work out what to do next. The white-haired man asks why they're here at all, worried about the danger. The woman says it's bigger than it looks. Something else is happening behind the scenes. Then they spot a huge structure wrapped in swirling energy. She says it may be the key to the recent events. Elsewhere, enemies wait in the shadows, ready to attack, and the group realizes they aren't alone. Now every move matters. Frey studies the situation and makes an important point. The red-haired woman answers with doubt, trying to understand his thinking. He lifts one finger, showing he has one key point left. With confidence, he says, everything depends on 1 month. She questions that plan, saying a month may be nowhere near enough. He stays sure that if they use the time well, they'll succeed. As dawn starts to rise, another clash begins, and the warrior charges with a wave of blue power. The battle keeps going as the red-haired fighter moves fast through the blasts. Incoming attacks and gets ready to strike back. Meanwhile, the silver-haired man watches calmly, reading every move. Then, he reveals a plan that could decide everything. The scene shifts as sunrise lights the land. The woman stares in amazement at a massive waterfall. She's clearly stunned by how huge it is. The roar of the water fills the air as the group heads for a hidden cave behind the falls, where something mysterious is waiting. Inside, a golden sphere shines with strange energy. Floating in the cave, the sphere lights up the walls, and the silver-haired man instantly knows it's valuable. The red-haired young woman drops to her knees, overwhelmed as the glow around her grows stronger. She watches in awe and confusion while the protagonist stays calm. With one simple motion, he controls a huge force with ease. Small lights drift around him, and as the energy gathers in his hands, he sits in meditation, wrapped in a blue aura. Even the waterfall seems to react to him, surging harder. The girl can only watch in silence. Then the energy suddenly shifts and turns a deep purple. The man opens his eyes full of resolve, sensing something huge is about to happen. The girl steps forward, without hesitating, and enters the phenomenon, letting the same power surround her. The man smiles like he's just confirmed her talent. He looks pleased, and the energy around them swells into a bright vortex that fills the cave. After the harsh training, the power finally settles, and the girl stands there trying to process it all. She looks at him and sees a playful, proud grin. Then he casually says they should get something to eat. Caught off guard, she stares for a second, then smiles. She thanks him, saying he's really changed before. He never would have brought her here to train until recently. Isabel never thought she'd spend time like this with him. He used to bully her. Yet now, something about him keeps pulling her in. She pauses, thinking carefully about what to say next. Lately, he feels like a completely different person, like someone who always knows exactly what to do. Curious, he asks which version of him is the real one. For a moment, she doesn't know how to answer. Then she laughs softly and says, "Both are him." To her, people don't really change, they grow. He closes his eyes and agrees. Isabel says again how thankful she is for that change. Before, he never would have taken her on a private training trip. Probably then, she stops suddenly uneasy about what comes next. They were about to spend a whole month together in that tiny cave, but Frey says he's not interested in kids and tells her not to worry about stupid things. Blushing hard, Isabel gets angry, even if she doesn't fully get why. Frey starts casting a spell, a barrier that works like a sack trap, in case monsters show up while they sleep. Then he lies down, says it's time to rest, and tells her to do the same. A moment later, he's already snoring in deep sleep. Isabel suddenly wants to punch him in the face. The next day, Isabel is still fast asleep. She slowly opens her eyes, facing another long day. When she gets up, she still looks exhausted. Frey had been awake for a while already. She only slept 5 hours that night, and that would be her last real rest, because the training was about to become much harsher. Frey shows her Cassadine's training method called conflict. It's an extremely dangerous way to train, so he tells her to watch only. Then, the aura changes completely as he releases his spells. A core starts to form, showing the forces he combined. Soon, the spells split apart and create a new state. Frey divides the mana in his body into fire and water. Two opposite powers crash against each other and hold each other back. It looks like a battle happening inside his body. With fire and water both under Frey's control, eyes closed, he keeps focusing on the technique, controlling the power of water. Inside him, the elements act almost alive. Water attacks, while fire tries to defend itself. On the other side, his body stays aligned with the fire. He has to keep both sides balanced, so neither one takes over, like trying to level a scale that never wants to stay still. Watching in awe, Isabel realizes how incredible the method is. This was Conflict Cassadine's method. She keeps her eyes on Frey, studying every second. Then she gathers her courage and decides to try it herself. Closing her eyes, she starts pulling energy into her body. Soon the forces begin to oppose each other. Just like she was taught, she tries to shape them into perfect balance. But no matter how hard she tries, she can't do it. The technique quickly makes her feel sick. She collapses to the ground in terrible pain. All of that happened from losing even a little balance. It was a brutal training method, yet Frey stayed calm, meditating like nothing was wrong. At that moment, Isabel has even more doubts about who he really is. Later, she decides to bathe in the waterfall. After a hard day of training, she washes off in the clear water. While bathing, she thinks over everything that has happened. When she gets out, she dresses and puts her things back in a bag. Then, she sets a few stones beside her. She places one large rock in front of her, with 6 smaller ones nearby. With one hand, she drops the small stones, then replaces them with another matching stone. It's how she tracks time, and she realizes 2 weeks have already passed. Through all of it, Frey hasn't moved from his spot. The boy kept using that terrifying training method inside the cave. After crossing the barrier, Isabel came back to see how he was doing. As she set her bag down, she sensed something odd and moved closer. A bright blue energy was pouring out. At the center, Frey sat cross-legged with his eyes shut. That surge of mana showed he was close to the 6th degree. After only 2 weeks, she had never seen anyone grow that fast. The power spilling from him held her in place. To Frey, it was still too slow. He needed more speed and control. Amazed, Isabel kept watching. Then she sat across from him, copied his motions, and tried the technique herself. Outside, heavy rain swept the area. Inside the cave, both of them kept training. By then, 3 weeks had gone by. The large stones tracked the days. Isabel and Frey kept releasing power, though her control still didn't match his. Then, she felt something strange inside her body. Again, she couldn't keep up with his unbelievable focus. Slip was enough to throw her balance off. Even so, the conflict method was making her stronger at a shocking pace. None of her ancestors had trained this harshly, which explained why modern mages seemed so weak. Then, she smelled her clothes and realized how bad she stank. Her eyes turned to the waterfall passage. The barrier was starting to break, as if something had pushed through. A moment later, it collapsed. A huge creature stood before her. Her eyes filled with fear when she saw the giant bird. At that moment, Frey opened his eyes to see what was going on. Pulled from his training, he quickly realized it was a phoenix. Isabel could hardly believe a creature from legend was real. The protagonist felt no fear. Instead, he looked at it with deep admiration. Seeing his reaction, she tried to view the bird differently. There were many monsters in the Hispania Mountains, but never had she imagined a divine beast live there, too. The phoenix had been drawn in by the fire mana released from their conflict training. Frey held out his hand and called the bird over. Panicking, Isabel cried that humans couldn't tame divine beasts. The phoenix watched his every move. Still, he kept coming closer and calm while Isabel watched from afar. Before long, the phoenix let Frey stroke its feathers without any hostility. Isabel was stunned that he could touch those burning feathers with his bare hands. But since the bird showed no anger, she stopped fearing it. Then she noticed the deep claw wounds across its body. Its heart had nearly been torn out. It was amazing the creature was still alive. She hadn't even known phoenixes could die, since legend said they rose from ash. Franks explained that they only resisted death better than most creatures. They were not immortal. Shaken, Isabel silently accepted that those mountains had to hide monsters strong enough to wound even a phoenix. Whatever it fought, it had been no ordinary enemy. Touching its feathers, Frey said he could help it. He waited for the phoenix's answer with steady resolve. Soon, the creature fully lowered its guard and trusted him. To Isabel, it suddenly looked more like a relaxed little bird. Frey joked that now it would enjoy the results of all his training. The phoenix opened its eyes, clearly not impressed. Still, the healing was nearly done. Frey poured all his power into closing its wounds. Isabel watched every second closely. To her, he no longer felt like the Frey she knew. His words and expressions had changed. Even the air around him felt peaceful. As Frey treated the bird, he remembered an old friend and teased the phoenix for hesitating because of the rain. Annoyed, the bird started to rise. Not a word, it felt like the two were about to race to the mountain peak. Touching the phoenix filled him with strong nostalgia. Soon, its wounds began to close completely. Once a phoenix recovers its energy, its healing returns as well. Not long after, the bird was back on its feet. Power surged through its body, and it let out a piercing cry. Frey smiled, glad to relive those old memories. They held each other's gaze, and the phoenix seemed grateful for his help. Then it flew off, showing its beauty as it soared away. Its strength restored, it looked even more powerful. A single phoenix feather remained in the cave. It had left behind a gift. A phoenix feather could heal wounds or be used to make magical items, so it was incredibly rare. That bird clearly knew how to repay a debt. Frey then joked that Isabel was like the phoenix, except she hadn't helped at all. That was when she realized he meant her. She couldn't believe he could be gentle with a bird and rude to people. Ignoring her reaction, he went right back to the conflict technique. Isabel was alone again while he sank into deep training. Beside her, the rain kept getting stronger as night came. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds. Rainwater still clung to the plants outside. By the stone count, 4 weeks had passed. In the cave, Frey was still training without stopping. Isabel kept watching him after a full month. He looked close to collapsing. He hadn't eaten, and he had spent the whole week meditating. It worried her. Yet, he also looked like some kind of divine master. She stared in awe at the energy pouring from his body. To her, he was truly unique. Even if he acted rude, his cold, sharp side, the calm kindness he showed the phoenix, his huge knowledge and seasoned way of speaking, it all made him seem like a great mage. At times, Isabel was reminded of that great mage she once observed. Maybe her respect and admiration for him were growing into something more. Suddenly, Frey's breathing became exact and controlled. Alert, she waited, afraid something unusual was coming. Then his aura burst, releasing all the energy built up through conflict. When he opened his eyes, the exhaustion was clear. A moment later, he forced himself to stand. Stunned, Isabel realized he had done it. In only 1 month, he had achieved the impossible, and she congratulated him. He had finally reached the 6th degree. Frey checked his body and felt the changes inside him. To Isabel, the sight was unbelievable. The youngest person ever to reach the 6th degree had been 35. If people learned an academy student had done it, the world would fall into chaos. Just by breathing, Frey could draw in mana, but then his face changed when he sensed something wrong. He stumbled and Isabel rushed in to catch him. After a week without food, his body was completely drained. He needed fatty food right away, so they had to hunt. But she still believed he would recover, so the two left the cave. Outside, they found signs of a brutal fight. Monster corpses were scattered everywhere. While meditating, Frey hadn't noticed monsters nearby. It seemed the phoenix had protected them. Remembering how he had healed it, Frey felt grateful and knew they would meet again. Since food was already here, he decided they would eat first, then head to the Schweizer dungeon. Suddenly, a scream of pain rang out. Two of them turned toward it at once. It was a human voice, and it wasn't far away. Hungry or not, they had to check it out. At once, Frey got ready to move. With one leap, he shot into the air. Desperate, Isabel kept shouting his name. Left behind, she didn't know what to do. In the distance, the man's cries only grew worse. He was in tears, begging for help. Tied to a tree, he had knives thrown around his body. His companions were already dead, and the bandits with sharp skull masks treated it like a game. Luckily, Victor's aim was awful because of his hangover. Juan took the knife from him and said he'd throw next. The vice-captain ordered them to stop fooling around. While chewing meat, he wondered when that mysterious woman would come through again. He was sick of camping in those mountains. Juan raised the weapon and called for everyone's attention, boasting that he'd hit the prisoner right in the forehead. The captive was sure he was about to die. Juan threw the knife with force. The man screamed as it flew straight toward him, but something knocked it away and sent it off course. The knife slammed into the ground instead. Every bandit froze, confused. One even joked that the wind had ruined the throw. Done playing, packing up to leave when Victor noticed someone standing beside him. It was Frey, appearing like a shadow. Victor instantly knew he was facing danger. Juan drew his knife too, ready to fight. Frey stood still, taking in the cruelty of the camp. Then his eyes shifted, and he saw they had been using people as targets in their games. They had clearly been enjoying it. One bandit even thought Frey was a corpse because of how he looked. Then the attack started before anyone could react. They cut Victor down in an instant, taking his head clean off. Juan was stunned by the stranger's speed. The rest of the bandits watched in alarm. Hearing the commotion, Captain Lawrence stopped eating. A powerful weapon flashed before him and killed his men. In a blink of an eye, the target disappeared from sight. It was a 5th-grade light sky, a terrifying weapon, and Frey wielded it with clear intent to punish them. He meant to teach those fools a lesson. Meanwhile, Isabel wandered through the forest. The girl ran around, breathing hard. When she reached Frey, she found a horrific sight. He stood among a heap of bodies, without any expression. He had killed them all, letting only one escape so he could track him. Both of them stared at something on the ground, deep in thought. It was the vice-captain's head. So Frey figured the captain was still alive. Curious, the girl asked if he planned to kill them all. After what they had done to innocent people, he couldn't ignore it. He wanted to stop the demigod's cruel fun of watching humans suffer and kill each other. Even if it seemed small, the thought of that creature enjoying anything made him sick. Then a scared voice called out to him. The man tied to the tree thanked him for saving his life. Though he had lost a lot of blood, Frey said he didn't have to take him along. The warrior panicked and begged for help. He didn't want to die like this. In tears, he said he had to apologize to his father before he died. Those words made Frey pay closer attention. Far away, some men were talking about the 3rd squad being wiped out. Captain Carls thought they sounded drunk for saying something so absurd, but the man swore he had seen the slaughter himself. The attacker had grey hair, a thin body, and a rotten smell. He was clearly no ordinary man. He fought so well they couldn't even strike back. He beheaded everyone in moments, and this man was the only survivor. That description caught Captain Carl's interest. It sounded like a powerful mage. The report said he could use 2 spells at once. That meant he was a battle mage. His subordinate confirmed it. Carl shot to his feet in anger. He ordered his men to find the intruder at once and report back. They would surround him and kill him. Still, Carl doubted the Acquared family had hired that mage. He asked the bandit if they had really been throwing darts at people. The human target was just a mercenary. Carl recognized he had been escorting a mother and daughter gathering herbs. It made Carl's even more confused about who the mage really was. Nearby, a wrecked carriage lay overturned with belongings scattered around. The fallen guards didn't move, proof of a brutal fight. One of them had an arrow in his stomach and knew he wouldn't last much longer. Captain Carl stood before him with a cruel grin. He had spent a long time hunting Sonia, the eldest daughter of the famous Aqua Knight family. She refused to give up and fought back with everything she had. Sonia was a highly skilled swordswoman. With one strike, she cut down 3 men. Anyone who came near her died quickly, but by the end, exhaustion was starting to show. Even then, she barely lowered her sword. She rushed straight at Captain Carl's, trying to kill him. But one man blocked the attack with his own life. Their weapons crashed together, showing both were strong fighters. Soon after, a heavy blow sent Sonia flying back. The sword dragged across the ground and helped her steer herself. Sonia Quarard was clearly worn out from fighting. Carls mocked her, joking she must love her sword since she refused to let it go. The rumours from the Illuminable Kingdom seemed true after all. Behind her, the maids sobbed in fear. Their great protector could no longer save them. Even with almost no chance to win, Sonia refused to surrender. Carls only smiled, enjoying the chaos he had made. He licked his lips whenever he looked at the girl. Waiting over a month in the mountains had been worth it. Her beauty was no rumour. At just 18, the eldest daughter of that noble house had already earned the title Storm. Looking around, Sonia saw all her guards had fallen. Only the 2 maids and Sir Leather were left. In truth, she was the only one who could still fight, but she was up against around 20 skilled men, and Carls asked where her mage bodyguard was. Sonia had no idea what he meant. A knight family like the Aqua Reeds would never hire a mage as a bodyguard. The mage who attacked his men clearly wasn't with her family. Even so, Carl wanted to know who that mystery man was. Then he made it clear they wouldn't kill Sonia yet. He had something worse in mind. He meant to violate her. His smile said enough. She understood immediately and was horrified. The bandits were excited by the idea of having a noble girl. Her face twisted with pure hatred. She would rather bite off her own tongue and die than become their toy. But Carls had plans for the others too. If Sonia died, they would use her maids instead. The men had been deprived for over a month in the wild, so they had no intention of killing the girls quickly. Now Sonia understood why the women had been kept alive. The maids clung to each other, shaking in despair. They didn't want to become a burden to their lady. Seeing them like that, Sonia began to cry. Sir Leather said it would be an honour to die for Lady Sonia. Bold as he was, he stayed brave and loyal. Sonia saw no way out. She looked crushed by her own failure. She asked their forgiveness, blaming herself for their coming deaths. But the maids said they owed their lives to the Aquarade family anyway. Sonia lowered her head, forced to accept that end. Then, the maids made a painful request. They wanted their lady to kill them herself. To them, it would be shameful to meet her in heaven after being used by those men. Sword in hand, Sonia said they would meet again in heaven with pride intact. Captain Carl couldn't follow what they meant. She then declared that for her maid's honour and her family's name, she would act. Tightening her grip, she said she would guide them on their final journey. Realising her plan, Carl ordered his men to stop Sonia Quarry at once. She swung her blade toward the maids' heads as the bandits watched closely. With tears falling, Sonia shut her eyes. She forced herself to go through with it, but when she opened them, she froze. The maids were still alive. Her sword had vanished from her hands. She couldn't understand it and thought someone had stolen it. She looked behind her, suspecting the bandits, but she couldn't believe any of them were that skilled. To Sonia, this was the deepest shame a knight could face. She even apologized to the maids for failing to give them an honorable death. Then she started again, telling everyone to bite off their tongues. A voice suddenly called her name. Captain Carl was thrilled. The ghost who destroyed the 3rd squad had finally appeared. Behind Sonia, Frey held her sword, stopping her from killing the maids. In an instant, Frey, Isabel and the wounded man stood in the middle of the standoff. The stranger's sudden arrival shocked everyone. Isabel was supporting the injured man who could barely stand. Carl said he had heard plenty about the man who had played with his boys. Frey handed the sword back to Sonia and asked if Carl was the leader. Still shaken, she just held the sword without a word. Frey gave off a strange, unreadable presence. He looked frail and harmless at first glance, pointing toward the mountain. Carl asked if he had come from there. That was where his camp had been. He wanted to know what happened to his men. Frey answered plainly. He had toyed with all of them. Carl's face twisted with rage. He immediately ordered his bandits to kill the gay-haired bastard, Since Frey was a battle mage, they had to stop him before he could cast. With their numbers, Karl thought they could finish him fast, but before they could move, Frey had already gathered his power. He struck with overwhelming force, killing several bandits at once. From the rear, Karl could only watch his squad get torn apart. Shaken, he couldn't understand how this mage cast so easily. Then an explosion erupted, smoke blasting out in every direction. Everyone was stunned by the power pouring from Frey's hands. Confused, Sonia asked who these people were and why they came. Isabel only gave her a faint smile. She said they weren't enemies, so Sonia could relax. Karl was blown back, but caught himself with the debris. He still told himself a battle mage wasn't unbeatable. A mage was still a mage. Spell delays meant he couldn't attack forever. Seeing how much magic Frey was throwing out, Karl figured he was wasting his strength. He wanted to see whether the mage would collapse first or get cut down by his men. Either way, Karl swore that head would roll, but as he moved in, he saw one of his men launched through the air. Then more of his bandits were hit. Their bodies were pierced through. Karl was terrified. This was nothing like he expected. Frey was unleashing attacks non-stop, striking both the captain and his men. Karl couldn't believe anyone could use that much power for that long. Even so, Frey showed no sign of fatigue. To Carlos, it was unheard of. Frey's power and skill were beyond anything he'd ever seen. As that sank in, his body kept scraping across the ground. Realizing he was about to lose, he tried to reason with the young man. Leaning on his sword, he begged him to stop. Most of his men were dead or too worn out to keep fighting, so victory was out of reach. They could barely breathe under the non-stop attacks. Many had collapsed, and were only staying up by leaning on their swords. The leader looked confused when Frey suddenly stopped, thinking he had run out of mana. Carlos ordered another attack. If they didn't kill Frey now, they would be the ones dying next. Behind him, Sonia Au offered to help Frey recover his mana, but Isabel knew he didn't need it. His level was already far too high. Frey formed a spell in the air and told Sonia to step back because it was dangerous. A moment later, the earth started shaking. The tremors were so violent that the bandits instantly panicked as the ground shifted beneath them. Even Captain Carlos had no idea what was going on. As the shaking grew stronger, huge cracks spread across the ground. Then the quake opened wide enough to swallow the bandits. Soon, the ground fully gave way. The men dropped one after another, grabbing at rocks to save themselves. In terror, they screamed for help. Even the leader was pulled down into the collapsing stone. Shaking with fear, the men begged not to die. Sonia could only stare, unable to believe what she was seeing. With one spell, Frey wiped them all out. None survived. The earthquake was a 5th grade spell, and Sonia couldn't understand how he had cast it. Isabel explained that his earlier attacks were just a distraction to buy time. Even then, Sonia had never heard of anyone using dual casting, and Isabel agreed it was unbelievable. She said she'd never seen anything like it before. Meeting Frey, Sonia grew even more amazed by his power. She didn't know much about real combat, but this was enough to shock her. Then she sincerely thanked them for the help. She introduced herself as the eldest daughter of the Aquar family from the Luon Honourable Kingdom. Frey answered bluntly, giving only his name, Frey Blake. He showed no sign of being intimidated by the young warrior. Laughing, Isabel Tresnine introduced herself and apologised for Frey's rough manners. Then Sonia covered her nose when she noticed the bad smell coming from him. Even so, she didn't think he was homeless. Maybe just some hermit from the mountains. Sir Leather showed he knew a little about Frey's family. The Blake family was a powerful noble house in the Casco Empire. Its current head, Isaac Blake, was one of the 8 7th-degree mages and ranked 6th among them. After a brief exchange with Isabel, Frey asked where Sonia and her group were going. Their first stop was the nearby city of Hispaniola, since he was headed there too. Frey said he'd travel with them, but Sir Leather remembered something important. That they had to collect the guards' bodies first, so the younger ones should move on ahead. The dead would be buried there, since taking them all to the city wasn't possible. Frey offered to deal with the bodies himself, leaving Leather stunned. With one spell, he lifted all the corpses. Then he moved everything around with precise control. Pieces of wood came together and formed a cart. Sonia's face showed pure shock. After loading the bodies onto it, Frey asked if they could go now. Sir Leather had no words. Jennifer and the maids looked completely amazed. They travelled for a long time until they reached the city. The cart floated along silently under Frey's magic. Sonia was stunned to learn he was only 20. He seemed much older. She couldn't understand how someone that young could be so strong. Frey said he barely remembered his exact age. 20 or 30 felt the same to him. What mattered to him was simply still being young. He noted that the bandits seemed to have been waiting for Sonia from the start, which was suspicious. Thinking back, she remembered their captain saying he'd waited for her for a whole month. That matched the time since they had left Luonable. Leather said the Aquar family had many enemies, so they couldn't be sure who was behind it. The bandits had also seemed highly skilled. That meant whoever sent them likely had real power. Still smiling, he pointed out that Frey had beaten them without trouble. Curious, Sonia asked how he had become so powerful. She used to think mages were weak and fragile, but Frey had destroyed that idea. She stared at him, waiting for his answer. Frey gave her just one word: effort. She didn't quite get it and stayed quiet, turning that word over in her mind. Not long after, they arrived safely. After covering the bodies, the men pushed the heavy cart onto the ship. One of the maids hugged Sonia and burst into tears. As the ship prepared to leave, she waved at the others. The vessel moved out smoothly while everyone watched. Sir Leather thanked Frey deeply. Because of him, they could return alive to their families. Smiling, Frey said he was just glad he could help. He waved back and wished them a safe trip. Sonia wasn't ready to leave it at that. Confused, Frey asked what she wanted. She said she wanted to reward him for everything he'd done. He refused, saying people should help each other without expecting payment. Sir Leather also insisted, saying it would be shameful to send him off with nothing. Frey paused to consider the offer. He looked at Isabel, waiting for her reaction. With a smile, she signalled that he could choose whatever he wanted. So, he asked for dinner somewhere that served really good sausages. After walking a while, they reached a place. Sir Leather and Sonia looked puzzled by the strong smell of smoke. It definitely didn't seem like a place nobles would visit, but Frey said places like this usually had the best food. Right after that, a voice demanded to know what he meant. The old man said he was glad to see the boy again, even if he looked half dead. Frey chuckled when he saw him. Then he said someone else had come back alive too, one the old man would care about. The man's face turned fierce the moment he realised who Frey meant. Isabel was carrying the wounded man on her back. At once the worker dropped every tray in his hands. In shock, he couldn't believe his son was alive. He carefully started treating his wounds. The man would need a few days of rest to recover his strength. Cassadine had offered himself as a hostage to protect the mother and daughter. For a mercenary with shaky skills, he had still proven himself a decent man. Crying, Cassadine apologised for shouting at his father and running away. Isabel watched quietly as the two reconciled. Frey realised they were related because they looked so alike, especially around the eyes. He also commented that the baggage was surprisingly good at healing magic. Annoyed, Isabel realised he had just called her baggage. Frey quickly changed the subject. They wanted to stay there, but the place seemed packed. Since good inns drew lots of customers, Leather thought they should find another one. Even while apologising for bringing them there, Frey kept insisting the sausages were worth it. Then the owner suddenly started kicking everyone out. He angrily announced the place was closed for the day. The customers argued, but it changed nothing. Demanding payment, he shoved them all outside. Once the last one was gone, he shut the doors. Then he flipped the sign to closed. Now the inn was completely empty. The old man said he wanted to prepare properly for his guests and told them to relax and bathe. By nightfall, they had settled in. Meanwhile, Sonia enjoyed a bath in the tub. Lost in thought, she moved her hands a little without really knowing why. After the long day, she looked tired and confused. Later, the table was filled with all kinds of bread. Even with so much food already there, the old man brought out another tray. Frey tore through the meal like he had no limit. Soon, Sonia Quaid joined the others for dinner. The group was struck by how beautiful she looked, but she also seemed strangely nervous. She called to Frey, but he just told her to sit and eat. Her face was bright red, almost like she was sick. She quickly explained she'd just taken a very hot bath. She twisted her ankle and started to fall. Frey caught her by the arms before she hit the floor. For a moment they shared a long, strange look. Then he noticed her arms were covered in scars. Embarrassed, Sonia pulled away and hid them. She stayed completely silent until Frey said the scars were impressive. He thought they looked cool. To him, they showed all her hard work, not something to be ashamed of. Those words clearly comforted Sonia. Isabel then cut in and asked where they were headed next. Sonia said they were going to the June family estate. At that name, Frey and Isabel both went still. They immediately thought of Perujun, their academy classmate. Peru had once mentioned a girl from the Aquera family being considered as his fiancée. They were sure that girl was Sonia Aquard. Neither of them said it out loud. Sir Leather asked if they knew Perujun. Isabel explained that Frey had attended the same academy in year as Peru, who had mentioned the engagement. Curious, Frey wanted to know more about his friend's fiancé, but Sonia looked confused since his question sounded more like an inspection. In the end, Frey decided Peru was a lucky man to have someone like her. A while later, it was time to say goodbye. Isabel wished the young lady a safe trip. Sonia asked Frey to visit the June family when he finished what he had to do. He paused, thinking about the sudden invite. Then, he said he might stop by the June territory. Sonia smiled brightly and said she'd wait for him. After that, the two set off through the forest. Isabel said Frey was lucky to catch the attention of such a powerful family. She added that Paravan must have spent all his luck winning Sonia, then drifted into thought. She had been talking about Frey before, not Paran. Even after clearing that up, he kept teasing her. At last, the group reached their destination. The Schweizer dungeon stood in a terrifying place. Seeing it made Isabel shiver. It really deserved the name-driven mountain. Winged monsters circled the dungeon, fangs huge and deadly. When he realized they had to climb to the peak, he panicked at the thought of facing those monsters. Frey denied it and pointed somewhere else. The girl let out a scream, but her companion stayed calm. They were looking at a Dragon King footprint dozens of times bigger than them. The shock made her lose balance and fall. She had never heard of a dragon that huge. Frey told her to get a grip. Anything could exist in the Hispanian mountains, which were basically hell on earth. Then he cast a small spell. A moment later, the girl was flung far away. A giant creature had just swung a tree trunk at them. The blow sent both of them flying and they struggled to get back up. Isabel was still too stunned to understand. Then, seeing the giant monster, she realized Frey had saved her. It was a terrifying cobra from the Hispania forests. Even grateful, Isabel thought he could have warned her before throwing her with blood-red skin and 3 eyes. It had to be a mutant. The bartender was right. Mutants were everywhere in those mountains. The creature drooled and ground its teeth in anger. Then it charged straight at Isabel, but she was already preparing a spell. Isabel quickly formed a fireball and blasted the monster with an explosion. Frey was impressed. She was much stronger than he expected. Smoke filled their view, but the mutant was still standing. In fact, it looked even angrier. Not knowing her own strength, Isabel thought her attack had done nothing. The mutant's skin had strong fire resistance, likely because of dragons. If they wanted to survive the mountains, it needed another plan. Since fire failed, there was only one choice: ice. As the area began to freeze, Isabel felt the bitter cold. With just 2 small ice spears, the temperature dropped like winter had come. Watching him, Isabel thought Frey really did resemble the great mage Lucas Troman. Focused, he sent the ice spears toward the mutant. The strikes were quick and exact, hitting its chest. Smiling, Isabel thought they had won the fight. Then both were stunned by what they saw. The mutant survived and hurled them away with all its strength. Even those strong ice spears hadn't fully pierced its skin. As the enraged Oru tore through the trees, Isabel sank into despair, but Frey stayed calm. Without wasting time, she threw more fireballs at its face. Still, nothing worked, but the attack gave them a chance to escape. The monster lost sight of where they were hiding. Frey admitted the mutant's skin and bones were as tough as Isabel said. With that kind of durability, the best idea would be to burn it away with fire magic. But Frey minded her, the monster resisted fire. She suggested burying it alive with something like an earthquake. The problem was that a large, noisy spell would draw every dragon nearby. Frey said he knew a piercing technique made for this. He drew the monster's attention and called it toward him. Then he created several more ice spears. To Isabel, they looked useless, but Frey insisted the key was never giving up. Shaken, she realized they might actually lose. With one hand, he readied his attack. The monster was furious beyond reason and rushed at them. Frey fired the first ice spear and it struck the creature in the head. Even stumbling, it kept coming. Isabel grew desperate. Sure, the plan was failing, but Frey stayed focused and kept using the same spell. He threw a second spear, then a third. The fourth hit the same spot on its forehead, but the mutant still didn't stop. After 7 spears, it finally began to stagger. As the beast wailed, he aimed an 8th spear at that same point. This time, the repeated strikes broke through its skull. Isabel let out a relieved breath. The plan had worked. Frey had complete faith in his power. The final hit destroyed the creature's massive head. Its corpse crashed to the ground. Teasing Isabel, Frey repeated that the key to success is never giving up. While they were talking, a loud sound made them look up. Dragons were circling overhead. That cursed gold had drawn them right to their spot. They had to deal with the flying monsters too. There was no time to rest. A huge blast erupted. flames spraying everywhere. Frey shielded himself and Isabel from the dragon's fire breath. Then they ran for cover. Using her power, Isabel made an ice arrow and fired it at the dragon's neck, but it still wasn't enough. Then something strange rushed toward the beast. Frey shot through the air and formed an ice spear big enough to pierce its chest. Calmly, he waited for the dragon to die. Even his eyes turned icy as he brought down another enemy. He landed fast while the dragon fell from the sky. Isabel watched it all in shock. Then her face changed because the fight still wasn't over. The Dragon King appeared from behind the trees. Before she could speak, Frey covered her mouth. They had to stay completely quiet. The Dragon King was still far too strong, so all they could do was wait for it to leave. But it seemed they had already been noticed. With its yellow eyes, the giant dragon searched for the humans. The two stayed perfectly still without a sound. Its heavy steps came closer. Then, the Dragon King looked off into the distance and chose to leave, crushing trees as it went. Once it was gone, Isabel could finally breathe. Even its footprint alone was enough to terrify anyone. Later, Frey sat on a rock to recover his power. Isabel stayed beside him, helping however she could. Before long, she had healed all his wounds. A butterfly landed on Frey's finger. After those battles, his body and mind were finally in sync again. Even so, he still had more to do in the mountains. He called to Isabel and let the butterfly go. The most important thing now was finding Schweizer's dungeon. Determined, they headed for the top of the mountain. Frey warned her to stay alert, since Schweizer might have put monsters in the lake. Curious, Isabel asked how he could be so sure the dungeon was there. Frey had heard it from Schweizer himself. The man had a bad habit of talking too much. The mountain summit was a lake with a small island in the middle. Soon they arrived. Step by step, they walked onto the shore. Isabel was amazed by the view. The island was beautiful with clear water and thick greenery. Frey muttered to himself, calling Schweizer a scoundrel the whole time. He was starting to understand everything. Beneath that island was a dungeon far bigger than the island itself. Frey explained that the island was only the entrance. It looked simple, but it was actually flashy. It's like Schweizer. Isabel had no idea what he meant. They kept moving under the bright sky. Crossing the island, they stayed calm. Then they found a giant tree with a passage inside. Frey knew at once it was the dungeon entrance. Looking down, they saw stairs leading below. Crystals lit the way, and the two headed down step by step. Isabel nervously thought about speaking, but feared what answer she might get. In the end, she said nothing and pushed the thought aside, so they kept walking in silence. At the end of the stairs, they found something strange, a huge door hiding unknown secrets beyond it. Frey studied it, searching for a handle. While Isabel had no idea how it could be opened, he explained it was a spell made by Schweizer. Forcing the door could mean death. Then Frey stepped up to a blue sphere. He raised his hand and touched it, feeling its power. At once, smoke began filling the area. Isabel looked on in confusion. The smoke slowly took the shape of a person. Then a small creature appeared in front of them. With a smile, he asked if they could hear him clearly. The boy was strange, and Isabel wondered if Frey knew him, but Frey stood frozen. She called his name, yet he didn't answer. His body shook slightly. The little boy happily welcomed them to his dungeon. Frey reached out to touch the boy's face, but his hand passed right through. It was a hologram. It was just a magic welcome message. Hearing it, Frey knew his old friend was still as loud as ever. He could tell Schweizer Stroh had made himself look much younger when he recorded it. Even so, Frey was glad to see him again in any form. Isabel's eyes widened when she realized the little boy was actually the great Schweizer. Curious, the image asked why they had come to the dungeon. For a moment, it seemed like they could really talk with him, but it was only a set recording made to answer in limited ways. According to the message, Schweizer Stroh's dungeon held anything they could want. Frey almost asked how his friend died, but the image moved on and said they had to answer a question to enter. It warned them that even one small mistake could trap them there forever. Frey got emotional. It really was Schweizer's voice and attitude. Like the past had come back, but he knew his voice couldn't reach him, as if he were the last one left. Still, he refused to believe he was the only survivor. The people he cared about were gone, while the ones who caused all the pain still ruled the world. In the end, his enemies were still alive. Isabel grew uneasy when she saw Frey's expression. Without wasting time, the boy asked what Schweizer Stroh hated most in the world. He just stood there smiling as he waited. Frey answered at once, the demigod. The boy happily confirmed that he was right. Then the image vanished and the doors opened. Isabel was relieved and quickly got ready to keep following Frey, but inside, she still wanted to ask the question she'd been holding back. Seeing her hesitation, Frey turned to her. She stepped closer and tried to speak, but no full sentence came out. Frey waited for her to say it. Before she could, he told her not to just stand around. They were heading deeper into Schweizer's dungeon, and they had to be ready for whatever traps came next. If she kept spacing out like an idiot, she'd die fast. So, once again, Isabel swallowed her question and accepted his warning. As they climbed, Frey wondered whether this dungeon would bring a beginning or an end. After a while, they reached another door, like the first one. Frey placed his hand on the blue sphere again. Smoke rose from it and formed a shape. A second image of Schweizer appeared older this time. With every door, Schweizer seemed to age more. They had to answer the second question, but this one caught Frey off guard. The figure explained they could take only one item, and breaking the rule would anger the golems. One mistake could be fatal, so they had to be careful. Then the name Iris Peace Founder came up. Young Schweizer said he never understood that annoying woman or how witches thought. While everyone else fought to save the world, she fell for a man and threw everything else aside. Isabel knew Iris Peace Found Her was the Black Witch. She was famous for her dark hair and beauty, and almost no man could resist her. Remembering how charming his friend had been, Frey got lost in thought. But when the image said Iris had her issues, and Lucas was even worse, Frey's face changed. Young Schweizer complained there was no point being a great mage if Lucas still couldn't notice Iris's feelings. Frey looked confused. He had never really thought about that before. Quietly, Isabel realized Frey was just like Sir Lucas in that way. The figure said even a golem had more sense than Lucas, then went back to the question. Iris had contracts with 3 strong demons, and one carried a weapon that represented coexistence. The question was even finished, Frey answered, Zura. When he got it right, Isabel was honestly amazed he didn't even need to hear the rest. Past the door, they found a room packed with treasure and jewels. A little later, they reached the next door. Now, on the side, Schweizer looked much older as he gave the next question. Isabel quietly thought about how the images kept aging. She wondered why each one looked older than the last. The answer was simple. The whole dungeon was built from Schweizer's journal. Frey gets Isa. Frey guessed Schweizer hadn't been thinking clearly when he made it. He felt his friend had been trying to leave a message for someone. Fran answered the third question correctly, and the door opened again. The fourth question didn't trouble him much either. Two kept walking side by side. Isabel was surprised they had already reached the fourth room so quickly. Frey found it strange that none of the questions were about magic, only odd personal things. Still, Isabel thought he was even stranger for knowing every answer. Soon they arrived at the next door. Old Schweizer calmly announced it was the final one. Seeing him so aged, Frey was shaken. The figure before him felt like the friend he had missed all this time. Again start. Then the name Lucas Troman came from his mouth without hesitation. For a moment, Frey thought he had truly been recognized. The figure said his greatest pride was being able to call Lucas a dear friend. Frey answered that he was proud to be Schweizer's friend too. Of everyone, Schweizer had been the dearest to him. Isabel could only stare, not understanding that strange exchange. Old Schweizer waited calmly. Then he asked the last question. What was Schweizer Stroh's real name? At that point, everything clicked. All the questions had been things only Lucas Troman could answer. Looking straight ahead, Frey gave the true day name, Schweizer Wilsman. Isabel couldn't understand how he knew so much. The old man smiled with pride. As the door opened, he told Lucas to enter. Everything inside had been prepared for him. Desperate, Frey begged the figure to stay a little longer. Before fading, Schweizer asked Lucas to take care of everything for him. Frey tried to stop him, but there was nothing he could do. Meanwhile, Isabel struggled to process what she had heard. The great sage Schweizer had just called Frey by the name Lucas. Lucas. Soon after, the two stepped into the final room. Unlike the others, it felt like a warm, comfortable bedroom. Searching a chest, they found the item he had been looking for. It was a flask filled with a clear liquid. Isabel was stunned when he said it was the frozen river. That legendary potion from the cave of Layman formed only 1 drop every 1,000 years. It could strengthen a person's inner mana. Just 1 drop could turn an ordinary person into a 4th-grade mage. Isabel was shocked. She had thought the frozen river was only a myth, and if Frey wanted to reach the 7th grade, he would need that elixir. Curious, she looked through the rest of the chest. Then she found a pair of earrings and was drawn to their colours. The moment Frey saw them, his expression changed. To Isabel, the earrings looked really tacky, yet Schweizer had kept them safely in that chest for years. They were typhoon earrings made by Frey himself. Isabel couldn't believe he had crafted something important enough to be in the final room. 4,000 years ago he had made them and given them to Schweizer, never knowing his friend had kept them that long. Isabel's face turned serious. She asked him to explain what he meant. Frey looked at her and wondered if he should finally tell the truth. After a brief pause, he decided to reveal who he really was. Isabel waited, tense and focused. At last, Frey Blake said he was Lucas Troman. 4,000 years earlier, he and Schweizer had rebelled against the demigod Lord, and his punishment was endless darkness. Then one day, a voice reached him through that abyss. It belonged to Frey Blake, who wanted power. He never knew how their voices connected or how their minds synced. But he heard the call, and Frey Blake was the one who gave him this body. Isabel stood silent, trying to take it all in. Her eyes drifted as she thought over everything she had heard. Then she asked if he was really telling the truth. The story was impossible to believe, but she believed him anyway. As wild as it sounded, it explained everything. Looking at the earrings in her hand, it all started to make sense. She knelt, greeted Lord Lucas, and offered the earrings back to him. He watched her closely. Then he took the typhoon earrings. Lowering himself to her level, he asked her to keep calling him Frey and help him reach his goal. He wanted her to act the same as always. The room was lit by a candle on the table. Frey seemed happy to have his old earrings back. Meanwhile, Isabel checked the chest again and found a sensory amplifier. Frey explained the items were Schweizer's creations. It wasn't really a bracelet. A scepter the great sage used like part of his own body. If used badly, it could drain all the user's mana and kill them. Frey put it on his wrist and chose to use it. He also put on the typhoon earrings. At once, energy rushed through his body. Isabel was amazed by Lucas Trauman's power. The boost was incredibly strong. Magic tools weren't usually his thing, but this one was a gift from a friend. As she kept searching, Isabel found something else. In her hands was a man of golem core. In the end, she packed all the items into Frey's bag. Then they looked toward Schweizer's desk. There, they found an eternal mana candle, another one of his useless inventions. Isabel said the room's design still showed how much Lord Schweizer cared about Lucas. He carefully opened a book lying on the desk. The words inside made him freeze in shock. The marked page said that was the day Lucas vanished. As he read on, he found Schweizer's suspicion about Robert. He believed only Robert could have made Lucas disappear, without a trace. Schweizer wrote down everything that happened after Lucas disappeared. He recorded the clash between Cassadine, the magic warrior king, and Lucid, the sword king. Iris's sudden disappearance, too. The demigod's influence had spread across the continent, so Schweizer stopped trusting other people. Even those who praised him secretly wanted the sage dead. His diary described the brutal fights he faced day after day. Lucas read about the lonely life his friend had endured. To everyone, Lucas Trauman had been their leader, someone no one could replace. And the more Schweizer tried to carry that burden, the clearer that became. Isabel could only hold back tears hearing such a sad story. Even after trying so hard, Schweizer wrote an apology for failing in the end. Those words shook the hero even more. With tears in his eyes, Foss. Lutz couldn't accept that his friend had suffered through all of it alone. Beside him, the girl searched for some way to comfort him. After what he'd gone through in this life, he knew how crushing that kind of loneliness was. Then he said he would carry that loneliness and that will himself. With anger burning in his eyes, he swore to wipe out the demigod's kind. After that, Frey turned away and went silent. But Isabel noticed something odd in the diary. There was still one last page, that whoever found it should complete Anastasia. Schweitzer had left all his records inside Anastasia, his greatest creation. Isabel didn't understand, but Frey was already searching through his bag. When he pulled something out, both of them stared at it. It was Schweitzer's masterpiece, Anastasia. The way back was still lit by the crystals. As they climbed the stairs, they talked about the gem, which was actually a golem core. Schweitzer had been a puppet master, but even Frey wasn't sure what Anastasia really was. Then, Isabel seemed to realize something. Curious, she asked if he could finish the golem with that core. As old memories surfaced, Frey stopped on the stairs. In his mind, he saw the past, a strange-looking golem with a weird blocky design. Laughing, Schweitzer called Lucas' golem pathetic and said he should just make a new one. Next time, he joked, Lucas should ask him instead. He could build a better one without even using his hands. He kept teasing him so hard he could barely breathe from laughing. Annoyed, young Lucas fired a fireball right at his face. The memory left Frey with a strange feeling. Back in the present, he pulled another item from his bag. If they could finish it, they might learn the lost history. Isabel asked what he meant. He explained that the lost history was everything that happened while Lucas Trauman was trapped in the abyss. A little later, He stopped again on the stairs. His face showed that something was wrong. Behind him, the girl asked why he'd stopped again. He ordered her to run to the village the moment they got out of the cave. Above them, dragons circled, searching for prey. When they reached the mountaintop, the air felt tense. Isabel's face filled with fear. Waiting, there was the Dragon King. Lucas faced the beast without flinching. The creature glared back, ready to fight again, since it was clearly intelligent. Frey asked if the Dragon King had been waiting for him. The Dragon King answered, amused by this human. With a roar, he'd been waiting ever since the boy entered Great Takunda's territory. So, the monster had sensed them back in the forest. From Isabel's view, Frey sounded a little nervous. The creature laughed and bared its huge fangs. It had waited for them to leave the dungeon, knowing people always came out carrying treasure. That made Frey remember the frozen river. Torkunda had been using the dungeon as a trap to hunt humans and grow stronger. The place Schweizer had treasured more than his life had become food for a greedy beast. Angry Frey said Torunda needed to be taught a lesson. The beast was caught off guard by that reply. For a moment, it just stared. Frey made it clear. If the dragon came after her, he'd kill it. Tunda narrowed his eyes and said he didn't like that look in Frey's eyes. Before the fight started, Frey again told Isabel to run as fast as she could, but she refused to leave when she knew he wasn't sure he could win. To the monster, humans like them were the best meal, power gathering in its mouth. It declared this was the perfect time to eat them both. Frey quickly grabbed Schleizer's staff. He cast Wall and sent the attack at the dragon. Torrund felt the hit. It did almost nothing, and Isabel was still standing in the middle of the battle. Frey snapped that she was useless here and only getting in his way. Hearing that, her eyes filled with tears. Still, she turned and left, saying she'd come back as fast as possible. At the same time, Takunda prepared another powerful attack. It opened its mouth and blasted flames at Frey. Frey dodged and rose into the air. When he looked back, the dragon was right behind him. With heavy wing beats, it chased after the boy. Frey cast another spell while flying, but even with his weak body, he barely managed to dodge the next attack. Then a new danger appeared in front of him. Several smaller dragons blocked his way. Using the earrings and the staff together, he formed ice spears. Then he poured his mana into a windstorm. The dragons had no idea what was coming. A second later, the blast hit them. The spell tore through the group in the air. Some dragons were sliced in half, while others were badly wounded. As he moved through the sky, Frey watched them fall, but taking out the smaller ones wouldn't be enough. To win, he had to bring down their leader. As he readied himself, Torrund rushed in. Frey only needed 3 seconds to finish his explosion spell. While casting, he saw the dragon closing the gap fast. The spell was almost done. Then, the timing lined up perfectly for a light trigger. A huge explosion burst across the sky. Flames swallowed the giant dragon's body. In the middle of it, Frey waited to see the result. It was a clever, powerful attack. In addition, even the creature seemed surprised that Frey had used its own speed against it, but skill alone wasn't enough. The Dragon King said the spell hadn't even tickled him. Frey realized he was in real danger and had no clear way out. Kunda stood before him, and a swarm of dragons closed in behind. In that trap, he had no idea how to survive. His last option was the frozen river elixir. He remembered Isabel asking if he wasn't going to drink it, but that elixir was no simple drink. Even he would need at least a week to control its power, and they couldn't stay in that forest that long without food or water. Calling it suicide, Frey decided he couldn't use it, so he'd have to fight with only his own strength. As he flew, his eyes searched for the Dragon King. Then he saw the danger too late. Takunda lunged and tried to swallow him whole. He was so close to those fangs that he saw no escape. Then something powerful slammed into the Dragon King. For a second, Frey didn't know who had saved him. She struck at every dragon that came near, grabbing some by the neck. She refused to let anything happen to Frey Blake, the one who had saved her. With one rush, she brought down 2 smaller dragons. The bird blazed with life. And she looked at Frey. There was respect in her eyes. But the worst problem was still there. Frey was shaken. He still had no good way out. Knowing the Phoenix couldn't beat the Dragon King, he begged her to run, but she was already moving in to use her power. She closed in. Takunda unleashed his full strength too. The 2 monsters crashed into each other. To Torunda, the hit barely mattered. Frey knew the giant dragons had strong resistance to fire. That made it the perfect enemy for a phoenix. Desperate, he begged her again to escape, but the bird showed no fear. She had understood everything from the start and was buying time for him. Her eyes told him to run while he still could. But Lucas Tram was not someone who ran from battle. Still, in this body, he was painfully weak. Even so, he knew he couldn't blame it on his frail body or on how magic had faded over the last 4,000 years. What he truly lacked was courage and resolve. Apologizing to the Phoenix, he knew he owed her a great debt. He owed her wish and retreated into the dungeon. No matter what happened next, he would never forget this lesson. Death was always close. It was just part of life. Telling the Phoenix to hold on a little longer, he drank the frozen river elixir. He smashed the empty flask on the ground and felt his body begin to change. His face twisted, his eyes widening as they darkened. Then Frey's hair started turning white. A wave of pain tore through his weak body as the elixir's full power hit him. His eyes changed color. He let out a terrifying scream. The energy inside him burst outward. It was obvious the potion was changing him in a violent way. Elsewhere, Tokunda recognized the Phoenix as the divine beast that had slipped away before. To him, it would be the day the fiery bird died. The fleeing human was tempting, but the Phoenix's life force would satisfy him far more. With fury rising, memories of that past clash came back. From the mountain, Tokunda watched the Phoenix struggle to survive. He wanted to make that beautiful creature his next meal. Even badly wounded, the bird refused to give up. Using the last of her strength, she launched one final spell. Blazing flames swallowed the whole area, but Tokunda knew resistance was pointless now. He realized the little bird had vanished without a trace. Still, the Dragon King believed patience mattered, and he was sure they'd meet again. Soon, loud sounds echoed through the forest. With one violent force, trees began splitting in half. The Phoenix had been blasted deep into the forest. Badly wounded, it had no strength left. By the waterfall, it could barely move. Frey could tell the bird had faced an unbelievable enemy. Its eyes silently asked for help. Seeing its pain, Frey swore to help. For him, the moment felt painfully familiar. Long ago, his old friend had been just like this proud, beautiful Phoenix. Hearing those words, the bird forced itself up to face the Dragon King again. It lunged in and reached for his face with its claws. Tokunda snapped at the annoying worm and smashed the Phoenix away with his tail. Its cry made the pain clear. At the same time, Frey was still struggling to control the frozen river's power. He knew it would be hard, but not this hard. In pain, he apologized to Schweizer for wasting the second life he was given. He blamed his own pride and overconfidence. He lacked both the energy to absorb the elixir and the will to endure it. Then everything changed. Little by little, his strength returned. Wrapped in a warm aura, Isabel was beside him, using her power to help. She had even brought food and water so he could take in the frozen river. That was when he understood she had gone to the village for his sake. With a sad voice, she talked about being left behind. Only in this life had Frey learned what true loneliness felt like. Not knowing why she even existed in this world, the girl admitted he was the only one she trusted, so he could no longer say he was alone. Even though she could barely care for herself, she was still helping Frey. Before the cold fully took his body, he smiled and thanked her. Then he realized what he had really been missing. It wasn't courage or determination. It was trust, the trust of those still living. Nearby, the two giant beasts faced off, though willing to back down. Then, the fanged monster noticed something strange around him. A chilling, terrifying energy was spreading through the area. The Phoenix gathered every bit of its power into one final attack. With all its strength, it slammed into the enemy, struck one of his eyes, and drove him into a rage. Tokunda answered by sinking his fangs into the bird. Feathers scattered as the brutal fight raged on. Even he was stunned that the bird had dared to injure Tokunda's eye. Their clash shook the ground, blazing with fury. Tokunda fixed his eyes on the Phoenix. Even near death, Frey still smiled with hope. In spite of everything, that smile never left him. A huge crack split the ground, pouring out fierce energy. That force blasted straight into Tokunda. The hit landed. He showed no fear. So, the monster moved to strike back. Debris filled the area, and the beast realized the danger had been real. Something was happening inside the cave. Light burst out in every direction. The flying monsters noticed it too. Beams froze them solid. They couldn't move at all, and soon the ice cracked and shattered. Tokunda was still alive, circling above the region. For the first time in thousands of years, he felt the urge to run. When that sinister figure stepped from the portal, Tokunda felt real fear. He turned and flew without looking back. He couldn't believe he was afraid of a human. No matter how tough that enemy was, a human should still be just a human. Still, he knew he had to recover until his eye healed. Then suddenly, the human was standing on one of his wings, leaving him stunned. The man began firing arrows at the monster. Tokunda cried out in pain as they struck, and the force hurled him away. With those weapons buried in his chest, his rage exploded, even full of holes, tore himself free, and got ready to attack again, without any sign of slowing down. But by then, the human was already gone. To Frey, a monster that old shouldn't depend on one eye. Then the man appeared in the dragon's blind spot. Ice power gathered for another strike. A blow smashed into Tokunda's eye that only made him angrier. He hurled rocks at his enemy, but they burst apart before reaching him. With a crazed laugh, the monster bragged about his past victories. Even so, fear showed in his eyes. Without noticing, his tail had started to freeze. Then, the human appeared again, moving through the wreckage. Now, the monster began to doubt what he was seeing. He kept asking if that thing was really human. After staring at him, the creature let out a long breath. Annoyed and uneasy, he wanted to know who his enemy really was. He beat his huge wings and flew closer. The pink-haired girl was terrified. Without turning around, he told her not to come any nearer. Then he prepared another ice attack. He mocked the monster, asking if that was truly his strongest move. Tunda opened his mouth, ready to finish it. A human with ice magic should have had no chance against that savage roar. Using fire, the dragon tried to condemn him to death, but Frey held his ground and blocked it. The girl could only shield herself. The shock wave was so huge it shook the mountains. Fire and ice slammed together and exploded. The beast's roar kept growing stronger, but it still couldn't break the wall of ice. He pushed ahead with all his might. Watching in fear, the girl thought Frey might lose as the pressure kept building. There was nothing she could do except watch every second. Then she realized Frey had vanished. Tokunda declared victory, calling his enemy an insect until something felt wrong. The girl noticed it too. A sudden chill touched the beast's neck. Frey had slipped behind him and was slicing off Torrun's head with ice. At last, the fight was over. The dragon's corpse crashed to the ground. To the girl, it had happened in an instant. Staring at the body, she realized her companion had slain the beast, and he had done it without being at full power. Then he started falling from the sky. He dropped like a stone, but the girl caught him. She saw at once that his body was freezing cold. The request was to take him to the Phoenix. As they flew, the red-haired girl kept talking about what he had done and how amazing it was. He calmly said the ancient dragon simply lacked the battle experience to beat him. He told her that killing humans and fighting a real battle were completely different. Raw strength alone would never be enough against true monsters. His plan had been to make the dragon think his last attack used everything when it was only 80% of his mana. The 20% let him get behind Talker and form an ice scythe. The girl admitted it was a brilliant trick. Phoenix feathers were spread across the ground. The warrior looked on sadly, and tears filled the girl's eyes. The great bird had already drawn its last breath. In grief, he touched its feathers and thanked it for saving him. But then the phoenix began to rise. Frey was going to bring it back with his power. Torkunda's body lay beside the great bird. The fire in the dragon's heart was being drawn into the phoenix. With that energy, the bird should revive. After Tokunda's death, the valley's dragons would tear each other apart to choose a new ruler. So, the next ruler should be the phoenix. That way, his friend's dungeon would never be threatened by another Torunda. Leaving that duty to the bird, Frey said he looked forward to meeting it again someday. Back in Cow Symphony Village, everything seemed peaceful. People moved through the market with smiles on their faces. Frey sat on a bench nearby, quietly thinking about his life. Then someone mentioned that a ship had been booked. While squeezing juice, the young girl said no ships were leaving today. After the battle, he felt fine, though he needed to gain a little weight. The gear from the nest was useful, especially the fire salamander cloak. It pointed at the spatial bag, holding everything they had recovered. Frey had refused to let his friends' things rot there. The two sat in silence, drinking their juice. The journey had felt so long that the coming semester made it seem like years had passed. But they had only spent a week in Hispaniola. The girl wondered if visiting Lord Peru's house was a good idea, though they'd be stuck there another day anyway, with no ships leaving. When they reached the main gate, both of them were caught off guard. The guard asked why they had come. Frey asked if Peruan was home. He said he was a friend, and the guard, taking him for some rude kid, demanded his name. With a smile he answered, Frey Blake. A memory of his old friend appeared. He had already spoken about the third son of the Blake family. If Frey ever came, they were to treat him with the same respect as their master. The moment he heard the name, the guard went stiff with shock. This was his master's only friend. Just then, a carriage rolled in. Another guard announced that the young lady had returned. Both of them turned to see who was stepping out. They waited beside the carriage. Then the door opened and a young woman stepped down. That was Miss Lilia, and the guards immediately tensed up at her return. They told her the boy beside them claimed to be the young master's friend. Lilia studied the boy carefully. Her pale eyes carried a quiet sadness. With a smile, her brother had spoken often about Mr. Frey. She also recognized the girl with him, Miss Isabel. The red-haired girl was so surprised she couldn't speak. She heads back to the carriage and introduces herself as Lilia Harren, Perun's younger sister. Neither of them moves. Isabel is so stunned by Lilia's beauty that she nearly forgets to breathe. The embarrassed guard explains they still hadn't confirmed the visitors' identities. Lilia makes it clear that kind of formality isn't needed and gives him a look. He gets the message right away. After saluting, he apologizes for being rude. Then the carriage rolls on toward the mansion. Even after passing the gate, the estate is so huge they still can't see the main house. Lilia quietly keeps watching the strange young man. She can't figure out why he'd been staring at her so hard. When Frey notices, he asks if she wants to say something. She says he's nothing like her brother described, and his hair is white, not grey. Pointing at it, Frey says a lot happened on the trip. Lilia laughs and tells him not to be so formal, so he quickly changes how he speaks. That only earns him a scolding from Isabel. Lilia then asks what her brother was like back when they studied together. Frey says he wouldn't know much, since Perun was 2 years older. Lilia notes that Frey isn't much older than she is. At the same time, Isabel tells him to act more polite since they're guests in the June family's home. Soon they arrive at the massive mansion. The carriage drops them off near a fountain. Perun is already waiting in the garden. With a smile, he greets Frey and says he's been waiting a long time. The two quickly fall into easy laughter and friendly talk. Perun also notices Frey's new hair colour. Frey, worn out, says he's starving. Lilia keeps noticing how different he seems. She'd never seen her brother smile this openly before. She cuts in and complains that her brother always ignores her. Perun walks over and calls her his princess. That only makes her mad. He hadn't even noticed her until then. She turns around and storms into the mansion. Perun says Lilia gets angry for strange reasons. And it's a real headache. Frey finds it weirder that Perun can call his own sister princess without shame. As they head inside, they start talking about Frey's coming trip to the Infernal Mountains. Perun asks if he already rescued his fiancée, leaving Frey confused. Isabel explains he's talking about Miss Sonia. Frey is relieved to hear Sonia made it back safely. She'd been training her sword non-stop and earned the title Storm at a young age through sheer effort. Her sword skills were outstanding. She was strong with powerful arms to match. Joking around, Frey says, "It's a waste for a girl like that to end up with Perun." It reminds him that guests must greet the head of the family first. They stop at a large door, ready to meet his father. Inside, the room is filled with expensive, elegant things. Even the cups and silverware look refined. Everyone is already seated, waiting for the meal to begin. Two blonde boys trade glances. Lilia eats cake, while the woman beside her sips a hot drink. Another woman keeps pouring tea. The family head says it's a pleasure to meet Frey and asks about Count Blake. Frey laughs and says he's doing well. Privately, he figures he's probably never met Frey's real father anyway, since he's only using this body. The mood tightens as every eye turns toward the patriarch. Jun leads the June family and is one of the Empire's 5 7-star mages, as well as the master of the 4th magic tower. Frey wonders if this man might know something about the demigod. Holding his teacup, Shepherd says the 6th magic tower is very far away. Because of that, he only met Count Blake once a year at tower gatherings. He says he misses the meaningful time they spent together. Frey studies the mark on the man's face. He's sure it's Schweizer's one and only magical tattoo, but says he's deeply thankful Frey helped his son and saved his fiancée. Then he asks what made Frey go to the Infernal Mountains. Frey keeps it vague, saying he had personal business there. He adds that it was too minor to bother him with. In the end, Shepherd lets it pass. He changes the subject and asks how banquet preparations are going. Perun says everything is on schedule. He'll handle the key guests himself to gain experience for the future. He bows and accepts the task. Then, Shepherd turns back to Frey. He's been researching a spell and wants Frey's opinion on it. Frey hesitates, saying his current skills may not be enough to help. But Shepherd says he just wants a fresh point of view from a young mage. Frey waits to hear more. Pun stands and says he'll be in the banquet hall. Frey asks Isabel to go help him prepare. Now only the two of them are left at the table. Shepherd starts again calling him Frey Blake. Frey doesn't look away. The man's eyes shift colour as he asks why Frey is hiding his real purpose. He demands to know what he's planning and Frey goes tense inside. A bead of sweat slides down his face. Shepherd's stare is full of displeasure. He asks why the Tron and rings came to his estate. Frey dodges it, saying there must be some mistake. But Shepard says Frey was clever to use Perun for his plans and arrogant enough to show that item in front of him like it meant nothing. That's when Frey realizes he's talking about the Typhoon earrings. Watching the duel, he looks puzzled. He thought Tron and Rings was only Perun's academy club. Still, he denies it and says he found the earrings in the Hispania Mountains. Shepard, confused, asks if he really isn't part of the Tron and Rings. Frey says he isn't. Jerome once asked him to join, but he refused because he hates being tied to a group. Shepard slams the table and snaps that he's not talking about Perron's little club. Then he stops mid-thought, eyeing him sharply. He concludes Frey is just a wanderer. Looking embarrassed, he asks him to lower his guard. Frey stays seated and lightly mocks the whole mix-up that bruises the Patriarch's pride even more. Still, Frey says he only came to visit a friend. Shepard's gaze sharpens again. He repeats that he came only to see a dear friend. He had no plan at all to meet Shepard. Elsewhere, the banquet is getting its final touches. Seeing the argument fade, Shepard speaks more calmly. He still doesn't fully trust Frey, but he's willing to reconsider. Though he wants answers about Frey's past. He asks who Frey thinks is the true master of the continent, and says that among human nations, the Kassan Empire is the greatest, even if it covers only a tenth of the land. Frey silently agrees. The continent's total power were 10 fingers, humanity would only hold 3. He knows there's another ruler, the hidden transcendent being controlling the continent from the shadows. His hands stay under the table, as Shepard says the very same thing. There is, Shepard says, a demigod. That word startles Frey, but Shepard keeps going, describing a partly divine being beyond humanity, and the true predator behind human society. It sounds like madness, but Frey knows those beings are real. Nervous, he can't help smiling. He remembers the 5 who once stood against the demigod. After 4,000 years, he thought the demigod ruled the world again, and no one knew the truth anymore. But people like this still existed, and their number was growing. Who knew of the demigod were people who still hadn't given up. Confused, Shepard asks why he's smiling so much. For the first time since returning, Frey feels a spark of hope. He says he knows about the demigod. Still, he warns Shepard to stay calm because he isn't sure yet whether they can be allies. He chooses not to reveal who he really is, though he says that matters, because Shepard claims to have read Schweizer's notes. Hearing that makes Shepard furious, Frey doesn't flinch. Two lock eyes in silence. Once calmer, Shepard says he hopes Frey will share what he knows. He admits they know little about demigods and aren't even fully sure they exist. The only thing they know for certain is that those beings are strong enough to wipe out every creature on Earth. Frey feels relieved that Shepard at least understands the important part. There can't be many of them, probably fewer than 100. Even so, each one is like living destruction. Then Frey begins a story from 4,000 years ago. 5 heroes rose up against the demigods: Schweizer, the great sage; Kassadin, the magical warrior king; Lucid, the sword king; Iris, the black witch; and Lucas Troman, the great mage. After the great mage vanished, history changed. The warrior king and sword king split apart. The black witch erased all traces of herself. Only the great sage kept fighting to the end, but he couldn't face the demigod alone, and that's how their names passed into history. The two keep staring at each other across the table. Like Schweizer's notes, Shepard knows things missing from modern history. He says his circle inherited the will of those heroes. In truth, they're split and scattered across the continent. Over time, that legacy broke apart, leaving them in a tense balance of mutual control. Frey thinks this is what always happens when 3 or more people get involved. Everything turns political. The biggest circles are the Stroke Callers, Peace Founder Bracelets, and Lucid Swords. Frey realizes those groups use their names, but he still doesn't know what happened to Kassadin or to Lucas. Shepard adds that the Trauman Rings are in bad shape. People and their leader may have died. Kassadin's title, the magical warrior king, is passed down to one person at a time, but no one knows where the current heir is, even with the same name. That circle has nothing to do with the Academy Club. Hard says the club was just something students made on a whim. When they spot gifted students at the academy, they pull them into their side, and having other groups with the same name actually helps them stay hidden. As he offers Frey a glass of wine, Shepard admits he doesn't know how far the demigod's eyes and ears reach. Frey realizes this very talk might already be overheard. Shepard had assumed he was loyal to the Trauman Rings because of the Typhoon earrings, Lucas's old relic. In the end, that's all he can reveal. Then he studies Frey with clear curiosity and asks how he got the earrings. Frey had claimed he found them in the Hispania Mountains. Rumors said Kuro's relics were hidden there, but no one had found any. The main reason was simple. Most nobody knew where the dungeon was, and even if they did, Tokunda was likely waiting at the entrance, dodging the real answer. Frey says he was in trouble and wandered into an unknown area. By pure luck, he found Schweizer's dungeon, but understands then that the notes Frey mentioned came from that place, too, which meant he already knew most of what had just been said. Growing impatient, Shepard presses him for details, but is disappointed when Frey only says it was an accident. Even then, his suspicion doesn't fade, so he asks Frey to show what the Typhoon earrings can do. Frey sets down his glass, and the earrings flare with bright, powerful energy. After showing their power, he asks Shepard what he thinks. Shepard stays quiet, closes his eyes, says, "This isn't the worst outcome." Then he adds, "There is an even bigger reason to doubt the boy. The mansion is fully lit, and the banquet is already underway. Guests eat, drink, and chat happily together." Frey enters the event in a black suit. He was glad to meet someone who knew about the demigod. But things were only getting harder. The worst part was learning the circles had inherited that will only to split apart and fight each other. He still needed to learn about the circle leader, the frozen river's power, and finished Schweizer's golem. Frey knows he has too many worries piling up, and maybe he'd only gone unnoticed until now by pure luck. Then someone asks what he's thinking so hard about. Smiling, the girl says, Lily made her dress just for her. Frey says, "It must be nice to live without so much on your mind." He frowns and the girl doesn't get what he means. He says nothing, takes a sip, and remembers an earlier talk. A month ago, during the Magic Tower conference, a report said someone had contacted the demigod that caught Frey's full attention. The man had hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but Frey's face made his curiosity obvious. So he said the one who contacted the demigod was Isaka Blake, Frey's father. Nearby, one says, Sir Patrick's sword skill rivals the warriors of the Looney Kingdom. Frey recognizes the flatterer as Gusbar, who gets invited to the next Deerstay family banquet. The man was easy to use, praise him a little, and his ego did the rest. Thanks to that stupidity, Frey got the invitation, and his plan was moving smoothly. He stands near a table with a cold drink, watching the room and a few pretty girls until something odd catches his eye. Looks toward two people talking in a corner and recognizes one of them. Then a voice says she's finally found him. It is Miss Sonia, stunning in a white dress. With Isabel beside her, she starts talking to Frey. Isabel notices something strange in his expression, pointing at Sonia. Frey tells Isabel that's what he calls beautiful. The two start bickering right in front of Sonia. After it settles, Frey asks if she wanted something. She lowers her head and says nothing, leaving both of them in an awkward silence. Frey offers her a drink. Just then, Gusbar walks over with a smug smile, but Frey doesn't know who he is. He wonders if it's some new fool, then freezes when the man calls him the trash of the Blake family. Gusbar grins and waits for a reaction. It was enough for Frey to know he was dealing with an idiot. Even so, Gusbar was surprised trash like him had made it to this banquet. For a minor country noble like Gusbar, getting invited had been hard enough. The place was where nobles traded information and influence. He keeps talking, saying Frey even got into the academy, something he never could. His expression stiffens when Frey tells him to leave. Annoyed, Frey orders him out of his sight. The girl teases him for repeating the exact line he said he wouldn't use. Gusbar snaps that Frey is arrogant and insane and has no right to speak to him that way. But then his attention shifts to the two girls standing there. He already knew Pan's parties had beautiful women, but these two stood out even here. What he couldn't understand was why they were with trash like Frey. Frey doesn't respond. Gusbar figures he's just trying to look cool in front of the girls. Three men walk over and ask if something is wrong. One of them is Sir Patrick with two friends. He glances at the girl before introducing himself to Sonia as Sir Patrick, eldest son of the Deerster family. Gusbar gets annoyed when he realizes Patrick is hitting on the woman he wanted. The girl in blue introduces herself as Sonia Aquarid. That name startles one of the men. He assumes since she's from another country, she doesn't know what kind of person Frey is. So, he decides to use that chance, once and for all. Sonia was the eldest daughter of House Aquarid and bore the title Storm. He steps forward and apologizes for not realizing she was Lord Perouan's fiancée. Sonia turns at that and says nothing has been made official. Ignoring that, he says Frey Blake isn't worthy of her kindness or attention. The group falls silent. Sir Patrick now realizes this is the infamous Frey. With a smile, he says he knows Frey's brothers well, the Magic Tower mages Michel and Heinens. Hearing Michel had become a landom, Frey dismisses it as useless. Patrick keeps pushing, saying he understands why County Saka cast him out and can't believe the same blood runs through them. Furious, Sonia steps in to defend Frey. No one at this banquet compares to him in her eyes and demands an apology. The man refuses at once. To him, she has to be joking. He says no one would invite someone so worthless to a banquet this important. His friends laugh and agree. Gaspar joins in, loving every second of it. Then, Perouan quietly walks over and remarks that they must have offended someone. He makes it clear that Frey's invitation came directly from him. The men are stunned. Perouan steps up to Sir Patrick and apologizes for disappointing him. He didn't know he needed the dearest to family's approval to invite his own friends. Then he declares Frey the most valuable guest at the party. Seeing them panic, he calmly tells them to enjoy the banquet. Guzbar tries to slip away, but someone catches him. Perouan grabs him from behind and says that if this weren't a party, he'd already be dead. Terrified, the men run off while apologizing. Perouan and the others watch them leave. Frey really was far more ruthless than he looked. He and Perouan trade playful insults about each other's personality, and the girls laugh along. The banquet goes on around them. Frey listens as Perouan calls him a very strange man. Holding his drink, Frey turns thoughtful. If the world knew what he did at Cortez, true, no one would still call him the Blake family's trash. Still, that kind of pride didn't suit him. Instead, he asks about Perouan's talk with his father. Perouan brings up the suspicion that Frey is tied to the Traman rings. For a moment, he says nothing. Then he raises his drink and asks if Frey plans to join his club. That was never Frey's goal. Remembering the earlier talk, he recalls that someone had confirmed his identity. So Frey asks who it was and is shocked to hear the name Heinz Blake. Heinz, his second brother, but also a Stroller's member like Pond's father. Even after everything the family had done, he had tried to leave a hint. Heinz was different from Count Isaka and McCall. He agreed with Frey's exile for another reason, but Perouan can only say so much. Frey then says he doesn't plan to return to the academy. That shocks Isabel. He no longer had any reason to stay there. From a distance, the girl watches the friends talking. Frey quickly notices her gaze, but says nothing. She worries over his choice not to go back to the academy. The Duke had recommended he join the third magic tower since it held better and more books than the others. Then Frey notices Isabel suddenly acting strange. It deepens and the girl walks through the mansion halls. She knows tomorrow they split up. Frey heads to the tower and she goes back to the academy. Ever since learning he was Lucas Traman, she knew this moment would come. Even so, she was still uneasy. She no longer knew what to aim for or what she needed to learn to become a real mage. Lost and confused, she couldn't figure out her next step. Then a door opens in front of her. Someone asks if he's leaving tomorrow. Frey says yes, then thanks him for the banquet and all the hospitality. He adds that Perron's name really does carry huge fame and status. He jokes that his friend really might be the once-in-a-century genius of the June family, repeating what he'd heard before. That might not be an exaggeration. Perouan first sensed mana when he was 5. Still, he says he isn't trying to boast. Even so, Frey is impressed. After all, both Schweizer and Frey only felt mana at 7, and by 17 Perouan had already reached stage 4, even if the records say he did it at 20. That gap in the story catches Frey's attention. Trusting Frey, Perouan admits he's never shared how he truly feels. With a heavy voice, he says his talent feels more like a curse. The two friends face each other. But Frey stays silent while Piranha looks down, choosing his words. He says he once had a teacher, a thin stage 6 mage, vice master of the 5th magic tower, and a man full of knowledge. Whenever Piranha asks something, the man would answer with a warm smile and a pat on the head. He loved that so much, he kept studying harder just to ask more questions. That teacher was the one who gave him a love for magic, but that was only how Piran saw it. Sadness fills his eyes. After reaching stage 4, he asked something even his teacher couldn't answer. The man became deeply shaken, then exploded and called him a monster. What Pon remembers most was the fear on his face. His teacher had watched him improve at a terrifying speed. In the end, fear spilled out. From that day on, Piran lost his direction. He still loved magic, but whenever he got drawn in too deeply, that same terrified face came back and stopped him cold. Every day, he cursed his own talent over and over. In tears, he wished he had been ordinary and learned magic with simple passion. Then maybe no one would have called him a monster. Frey gently puts a hand on his shoulder, but Perouan keeps crying, unable to hide the pain. Frey tells him to quit being so dramatic. Then he asks him to listen carefully. He says, some people are beyond genius. They stand at the very top of magic, and if one unworthy teacher was enough to break him, he'll never reach that peak. Perouan listens closely. Frey warns that by the next time they meet, be far beyond where he is now, so Peron better do the same. That makes the boy go quiet. He reflects for a moment on the demigod, and Frey suspects he already knows it exists. Frey stands firm. The demigod is the evil god who controls intelligent life and twists the laws of the world. But humanity also shares the blame for failing to understand the chains it's living under. Even so, humans can still beat him and fix the world if they refuse to give up. Frey says that's a goal only humanity can achieve. If Powen wants an easy life in a magic tower while bragging about his talent, fine. But Frey's goal is the peak of magic, so he can defeat the demigod. He wants to reach the final stage. For now he wants to know what Powen truly wants. Peron stays seated in silence. He only lets out a slow sigh. Outside, the girl listens through the crack in the door. She had hoped her friend would stand against his family and choose his own road. In her mind, she sees the image of two great men. Frey pats his shoulder and says he'll always stay one step ahead. Peron makes one last reply. Next time he'll be the one in front. Pleased, Frey says that's what a real friend should say. Hearing that, the girl walks away in tears. Everything she's heard is too much to take in. The next morning, clouds cover the sky. Frey is already outside, ready to leave. The weather suits the trip just fine. Then someone asks if he's really leaving his baggage behind. It's the girl carrying a huge backpack. Frey looks confused and asks what baggage she means. She reminds him he used to call her baggage a burden and an obstacle. Now she's made up her mind to push her magic as far as it can go. So, she'll follow the greatest mage in history instead of learning from anyone else at the academy. Frey warns she'll regret that choice. She ignores him and keeps walking, saying she'd follow him even into hell. Frey answers with a faint smile. Then, two calmly continue their journey together. Before long, news spreads about Frey and Perwyn's friendship. Lord Michael hears that the two are far closer than expected. Sir Patrick reports that Frey was the banquet's most important guest, but Michael hardly reacts. The man nervously keeps trying to explain, yet Michael doesn't seem interested in his younger brother's new friendships. In the end, he dismisses him from the office. Still, he does find it odd that Perwyn sees Frey as such a close friend. He turns to Heinz and asks what he thinks. Heinz says it isn't surprising they went to the same academy. Michael rises from his chair. He decides it may be worth telling their father what he's learned. Then he leaves the room, leaving Heinz behind. Heinz watches him go, which then looks back out ahead. In one hand, he holds a strange object. Frey explains Duke Shepherd gave it to him, a qualification needed to start the test for his circle. The girl thinks joining the circle may be the best way to learn more about the demigod. Until recently, Isabel had never even heard that name. She also knew nothing about the 5 heroes her friend once stood with. She was only taught they were great masters. If not for Frey, she would still think the demigod was just a made-up story. Frey says the worst kind of control is the kind people can't see. Those trapped by it can't think for themselves or choose their future. They fight with fake pride and false victory, becoming happy slaves, and that's what humanity is now. Even so, he warns her of one thing. He never truly lost to the demigod. He's just been on a very long road to victory. Soon, they arrive at a massive tower. It's Isabel's first time seeing a magic tower up close. Frey still has half a year before he can join the circle. Till then, he has to steady the frozen river's energy and train until his old strength returns. The place fills him with nostalgia, and he says this is where he first truly devoted himself to magic. Then several people approach. The two notice their footsteps. They look like cloaked magical beings. They stop near the newcomers, and it turns out they're dark elves. Elves and dwarves are allowed to move freely through human lands. That surprises Frey, though he remembers reading about it at the academy. Even so, compared to 4,000 years ago, it's still a shock. Back then, the elves had fully united with the great northern jungle as their own land. One of the elves notices something strange, and Frey stares back, but they pass by without a word. Up close, the tower feels even more enormous. Warriors train in combat and also practice magic. The hall is packed with fighters. The girl kneels and starts training too. She's fully focused, already used to the battle training method. Then, she notices sharp movements nearby. Crange Frey is practicing ancient techniques. She can't help watching him closely. Rumours say he spends all day doing some weird dance, and everyone calls him a freak. At first, it really does look odd, but now that Isabel understands the training style, she can clearly see the flow of Kai. Countless incredible moves are hidden inside that dance. He strikes too fast for the eye to follow, then slips back to his starting point like flowing water. It's not a dance at all. It's high martial arts. Nearby, a man drops to the floor. He gives up and begs his opponent to stop. That opponent stands over him. The elf says the human was far too weak. though saying that after the man's surrender is rude. The dark elf woman asks if this is really the warrior Liamson was praising. Embarrassed, the elf quietly disagrees with his master. As he goes to help his opponent up, he notices something unusual nearby. It's Frey still moving through his strange form. The elf's eyes lock onto him. Isabel realizes he's the same dark elf from outside the tower. He asks if Frey is a magic warrior. Frey shrugs and says he's a mage. The elf still doubts it since those moves don't look like a normal mage's. He notes that Frey is human, and Frey simply tells him to call him Frey. The elf then introduces himself as Liamson. After that, he asks Frey to fight him. Frey is confused by the sudden request, though Liamson says it isn't exactly a fight. He just can't remember the right word. His master helps him out and says he means a duel. Soon, all four stand together in the middle of the hall. The woman introduces herself as Camel and asks for the girl's name. She apologizes for the interruption, saying her companion is an annoying idiot. The two start arguing, and Elvish and Isabel can't follow a word. Frey doesn't mind. He says he's ready to duel. Liamson is surprised a human can speak Elvish. This guy really is interesting. Then he says it would be even more interesting to see an elf learn human magic. It sounds just like something the elf elders would say. People gather as they realize a new duel is about to start. The dark elf gets into position. His movements are strange and complex. He moves in on Frey. He kicks in from the left, but Frey blocks it, shocking him. Liamson attacks from every angle, using speed to break through. These were silent shadow steps, all built on footwork. He tries again to reach Frey and gets blocked again. Then Frey starts those dance-like moves and knocks Liamson down with one strike, but the elf catches himself on the ground. Frey's style feels more like a wild beast than a person. The duel keeps getting better, and neither side is done yet. They jump up and try to hit each other in the air. The crowd watches in shock. The elves can't believe this white-haired human can match Liamson, their next leader. Frey slashes the air with sharp hand strikes. Liamson throws another kick, but the two crash together mid-air. They land crouched and breathing hard, staring each other down. The elf master decides Frey isn't a true magic warrior. Build says otherwise. Still, she can't figure out how someone that's slim blocked all of Liamson's attacks. Frustrated, Liamson shouts at Frey and rushes in for a final blow. The exchanges grow even harsher. Watching closely, Camille is amazed by Frey's perfect mana control. She tells them to stop. Out of breath, the two praise each other. Frey says that in a bare-handed fight at night, Liamson would likely be stronger than him. He also points out that Liamson isn't used to close combat. Smiles and suddenly bursts out laughing. Then he asks how long Frey plans to stay at the magic tower. Isabel hands Freya plans to stay at the magic tower. Isabel hands Frey a towel, and he says he'll be there about 6 months. Hearing that Liamson says he's glad. Camille is still curious about this human, and as she moves her earring comes into view, she instantly notices Frey's powerful item. Frey sees that she cuts herself off mid-sentence. Instead, she asks why he came to the 3rd magic tower. The tower had better books for what he needed. He wants to make a magic elixir. The others are shocked that the weird dancer is talking with the elves' leader, but Frey says none of the books he checked had the answer. So the elf offers him access to magical books. To read first-degree books, he need to pass the reading test and earn approval from 3 landmasters. Interested, Frey asks when he can take it. The earliest chance is tomorrow. The next day, the main hall is packed. Frey draws plenty of attention after people hear he fought a dark elf evenly. They also wonder why a magic warrior is taking the test. Then someone calls out and they turn. Camille and Liamson are there too. They brought friends along because they were bored, and once this was done, Liamson wanted a rematch. The doors open and the 3 masters walk in. These are the landmasters of the tower. The one in the centre is Michael, a very important man. The first test starts. They have to make a sphere of energy, so everyone begins showing what they can do. In the second part, they must compress it. Everyone carefully follows the instructions. At first, the test looks easy. Then, Master Michael pulls something from his sleeve. Small blue sphere. He says they'll pass only if they can compress theirs smaller than that. But getting it down to marble size is incredibly hard. Time passes and many contestants fail and get eliminated. One man strains to shrink his sphere. He fails like the rest. It was just too small to reach. Isabel tries with all her strength to match the size. Then Master Michael announces that she passed. Exhausted, she finally relaxes. Next, Michael looks at someone else. The sphere is about as small as it can get. The Dark Elves don't need more testing. They already have permission to read the magic books. Then, someone questions another student. Frank had reached an unbelievable level, but the man beside him thought he'd quit. He speaks to Master Michael. The man is stunned. Your eyes can fool you. Mana has to be sensed. Frank had compressed his fear until it was invisible. Michael is impressed by that control. After noticing his earring, he says Frank can skip the remaining tests. The boy introduces himself as Fred Blake, third son of the Blake family. Michael also says he wants a private talk. Soon, the two are in a bright room. Michael says his skills were remarkable. Once he hears Duke Shepard recommended him, he gets straight to the point. But Michael already knows he's reached stage 5. Frey was actually aiming for stage 7, but keeps that to himself. Looking outside, Michael asks if he's heard of the demigod. Frey shows he knows a little. Paul says traces of the demigod were recently found in Ushiano, along with signs of apostles. These apostles were chosen by the demigod, gifted with divine power, and called themselves apostles. Now, fanatics all over the world are gathering to go there. Frey is surprised. Nothing like this existed 4,000 years ago. Bush falls under Master Michael's rule, along with the Honourable Lucas. At this rate, villages and cities could be destroyed very soon, so they need to investigate. Michael asks Fred to join them. He accepts right away. Michael finds that response a little strange, but also interesting. It was a dangerous mission, so maybe he should have taken more time to think. Frey only wants to know why he was chosen. Michael lowers his sleeve and shows him a relic of Iris. He says he's part of the Peace Founder bracelets. After the Master of the Traman Ring Circle was killed by the demigod, things fell deeper into chaos. The dark elves at the tower were reinforcements from the Black Teeth. That's why Michael recognized him. A young man wearing typhoon earrings was hard to miss. Touching them, Frey realizes that items somehow became famous. After some preparation time, he was able to study the energy of the frozen river. Then, Michael asks why he wants to read the magic books. Frey says he wants to make an elixir, so he needs to study alchemy. The old man is impressed and says books aren't what he needs. He should ask a certain woman. Confused, Frey follows the clue anyway. He knocks on a door and waits. When the girl appears, he introduces himself and says, Lord Michael sent him. This is Professor Adelia, a genius from Westerod Academy. Inside, Frey notices her way of living is pretty extreme. From her chair, she tells him to sit wherever he wants. As he looks around, it's all kinds of study tools. Tired and busy, she tells him to explain what he wants in 5 words. Frey focuses and turns to her. He says he wants to make a mana potion, and she's impressed by how fast he answered. Now she's curious what kind of potion it is. He hands her a vial. She studies it at once. The mana inside is unbelievably dense. Frey starts to explain, but stops halfway. Annoyed, the professor tells him to use more words. He explains it's the heart of a 1,000-year-old dragon with mana around 100,000. He wants to turn it into an elixir. It's crazy, but her eyes light up. She says the method is hard because of the ingredients. He'll need something almost impossible to find, a phoenix feather. Frey immediately sets one on her desk and asks if she needs anything else. Then she says it's her first time seeing one. Then she asks him to compress an energy sphere to grape size. Frey does it with ease. He quickly compresses the sphere, and not long after the two begin their experiments. Delia starts wondering who this new partner really is. She guesses he's from the Blake family. She doesn't know the name Frey, but she knows his brothers. Even if some of his knowledge is old, his grasp of alchemy and mana control is amazing. With skills like that, she can't believe she's never heard of him. Adelia suddenly grabs him by the collar. Her face makes it look like she's about to confess something terrible, but instead she begs him to be her assistant. She even offers great pay, but he turns her down. So, she promises to teach him secret production methods. No one else knows. Then, she starts thinking of other ways to win him over. Sitting on the floor, she gets caught on another question. She doesn't get why he keeps calling her professor. Frey says he's a student from Westerod Academy. That makes her consider blackmailing him with grades and his school future to force him into helping. But before she can try, Frey says he dropped out of school. He also learns she knows something about making golems. On the floor, she asks if he wants to learn. Frey guesses a mana core of 1 million might be enough to create one. She shrugs and says that's absurd and shows little interest. A core like that shouldn't even exist. Controlling it would be nearly impossible, and a golem would need legendary minerals plus a huge number of steps. Hearing that Frey falls deep into thought, he remembers Schweizer's request to finish the amnesty. It made Schweizer's task even harder than he first thought. The professor starts wondering if he really might have a mana core worth 1 million. She just smiles and says nothing. Then she flatly says that's impossible. The dark elf looks exhausted. His opponent sends him flying. After hitting the ground, he admits he lost, but still claims it was pure luck. Then they hear applause and praise. Nearby, Isabel is teaching the elves how to compress energy. The master says her lessons are clear and easy to follow. When she walks over, she learns the elixir will be finished that night. That meant he'd soon reach the 7th stage, though he still had a long way to go. Hearing that, Camel gets curious. She asks if they'd like to learn spirit magic since it would help a lot if they ever made a spirit contract. In return, she wants them to teach magic to her children. Frey meets Professor Adelia and she tells him the elixir is done. Even so, uneasy about letting him drink it and urges him to change his mind while he still can. The elixir's quality is incredible. Its mana is twice as strong as normal, and if he drinks too much, his bones could melt. Frey thinks that sounds perfect. Adelia is speechless. With a shrug, she says it's his choice and tells him not to come haunting her after he dies. To thank her, he gives her a gift. The Ides necklace. She immediately starts scolding him. She assumes he's trying to flirt with her. He calmly explains the necklace will improve her focus and concentration. She still sticks to her idea. Frey is left speechless and decides he'll never understand women. The window is boarded shut. Inside his room, Frey grips his bag. He takes out several stones, then throws them around the room. A layer of energy spreads, turning the whole place cold. Mist escapes his mouth with each breath. He studies himself and begins to meditate. Then he opens the flask and drinks the elixir in one go. His eyes start glowing with fierce energy. Everything around him begins to change. At the same time, the elf girl asks Isabel about the 7th stage. She says they only recently started learning human magic, so that system is still new to them. She wants to know if human stages are like their own ranks or classes. Isabel explains that someone in the 7th stage is called an archmage or great mage, and would be treated like a count, honoured greatly, and recorded on the imperial tablet. The master asks if Frey's goal is just success or becoming a count, but the girl shakes her head because Frey said this was only the start. His real goal is far beyond strength or fame. Then one word is said out loud: demigod. Meanwhile, the potion makes Frey absorb all the energy in the room. He wants to take the world back from the demigods. After drinking the elixir, he realizes he's reached the 7th stage. Later, they arrive under a sky filled with mist. Hallbridge was where the apostles had been found. The girl looks around and feels how strange the place is. It has a dark, threatening air. Her companion says it's divine power, but she doesn't really understand. Frey hasn't felt that presence in a long time. The sickening feeling almost makes him throw up. Then he asks the master something he's been wondering. How strong are the humans personally chosen by the demigods? The village had fewer than 500 people, and it lived on its own without dealing with nearby towns. It was the perfect place for apostles to work in secret. The master warns that this mission will be dangerous and asks if the girl can handle it, but Frey knows Isabel can protect herself just fine. As she watches the area, she spots someone coming. The man asks why the Lord Mage of the Magic Tower would come to a place like this. He is Hallbridge Mayor Melad. Michael says he has a few questions. He asks if anything changed recently, anything at all, even some small habit or strange feeling. But the mayor says, this is only a small village where every day is the same. The old man nods at that answer, then asks where all the villagers are. The streets are empty, like the village was abandoned. The mayor says, today is different because everyone is in the nearby forest. The answer makes them realize he's hiding something. He nervously insists he isn't lying. Frey calls for the dark elf, Lamson, and orders him to search the area. The master is surprised that the arrogant elf obeys Frey so easily. Lamson quickly checks the whole village. Without anyone noticing, he returns and reports that no one is there. He also found blood trails everywhere. Right then, the mayor changes into a dangerous creature. Everyone instantly goes on guard. These were servants of a demigod sent to kill them all. First target was the mage. The monsters rushed straight at the old man, but Isabel moved faster and pulled him out of danger. She unleashed her power and raised a pillar of fire, burning one of the creatures to ashes. Her flames were stronger than the monsters. It's not enough to wipe them all out at once. So Frey jumped in and split one enemy's head with an aerial slash. Then he fired slashes in every direction. One beast was stunned that Frey killed its ally so easily and tried to run, but the dark elf was already beside it. He cut its legs, sending it crashing to the ground. Frey walks up and plants his foot on its chest. He demands to know everything it knows, but the monster claims it knows nothing. Frey doesn't want to waste time, so Master Campbell steps in. About to use spirit magic, she starts speaking in an unknown language, calling on the spirits for help. A small spirit appears. It's a shadow spirit named Dark Goron, perfect for pulling information out of people. The spirit moves at once. The master orders it to control the creature's mind. It leaps onto the monster and enters through its mouth. Compared to this, torture looked merciful. The master laughs. She clearly loves that spirit. Watching this, Michael decides it's best not to make dark elves your enemies. They ask where the villagers are, and the monster answers that they're all now. They need to know why this happened. It says the villagers were used as sacrifices, though it doesn't know for what exactly. Sacrifices were used to make monsters and awaken the apostles' power. Then its eyes flash red, realizing something is wrong. Everyone tries to protect themselves. A huge explosion tears through the village. The master shields his eyes, and the elves use their powers to defend themselves. Frey's earring suddenly reacts and forms a strong barrier. Camel says the monster had been brainwashed to self-destruct. The situation is bad, so they decide to fall back. If a powerful apostle made those monsters, they might not be strong enough to beat him, but Frey refuses to give up. The apostles already know they're here, and they may not get another chance. The old man says they should wait for Lord Lucas to return, because facing an apostle that's strong without him would be suicide. Frey says he'll take Lucas's place with his own resolve. But this isn't the time for pride. The 7th stage is the stage of fusion. When opposite elements collide, they explode, and a 7th stage mage confuse them. Frey says has nothing to do with pride. With a snap of his fingers, he shows them. 2 beams rise straight from the ground. The master can't believe what he's doing. Frey keeps going and brings his hands together. He's trying to merge the 2 elements, something someone like him shouldn't be able to do. Even while scolding him, the master is amazed that he fused such massive spells. He asks if Frey is really still only in the 7th stage, but Frey says no and repeats that he'll replace Lord Lucas. That night, a voice calls Frey over to look at something. Camel is kneeling beside a body. The victim didn't die from fire. It was electricity. It means the apostle serves the demigod of lightning. A human using a demigod's power is a serious problem. Still, the elder says apostles aren't entirely bad for humans. The first apostle was subdued in Casca, and something unexpected happened. Then the demigod controlling that apostle disappeared. It wasn't common, and no one knew why. But if an apostle dies, the demigod tied to them can be affected too. 4,000 years ago, apostles didn't exist, so Frey wonders what changed among the demigods since then. They keep moving through the area. They can't sense any life in the forest. It feels completely dead. Trees, animals, even insects, nothing has life left. Camel is horrified that nature has been drained so completely. Someone touches the ground with 2 fingers. And Isabel says the whole forest feels like a trap sealed by a powerful barrier. Frey suggests destroying everything, but if they start a fire, nearby villages could be hit, too. Camel agrees. Even then, breaking a barrier, this complex, would take at least 2 days. Frey touches the trees and feels nothing. He studied the barrier, looking for a way to break it, but there was no time to waste. So, he chose action over thinking too long. While the elves covered him, Frey checked the barrier and finished almost at once. Everyone to stay behind him, then called on his wind magic, forming a huge whirlwind. It slammed into every tree at once, blasting debris everywhere. In a single strike, he cleared the whole area. Master Michael stared in shock at what the boy had done. This wasn't power you'd expect from someone barely 20. He quietly felt it might be time for the next generation to take over. Then he looked ahead and noticed something emerging with divine energy, like an apostle. The old man tensed up, then slowly recognized the figure coming closer. He could hardly believe it. The one stepping forward was the Honourable Lucas. Everything suddenly became confusing. The truth was, Lucas had become an apostle. He scolded Michael for not waiting a little longer. The old man could only think there had to be some mistake. Lucas simply wondered what should be done now. He lifted a finger and began a spell. He meant to end Michael's life and fired at him, but Frey blocked it. Lucas was startled that his attack had failed. Even so, the old man collapsed. He still couldn't accept that a circle executive had fallen this far, but this man was no longer the Lucas he once knew. Frey demanded to know why the circle had betrayed everyone. Lucas dodged the question and only told him to show respect. Then he said he had come to understand true power. To him, humans were nothing but insects, no matter how hard they fought. That brought back one of Frey's memories. Furious, he snapped that humans were not insects. A strange energy rose from him, fueled by rage. Isabel had never seen him this emotional. Lucas claimed he hadn't surrendered. He had simply accepted the demigod's strength. The other circle members also understood how vast that power was, but people still forced themselves forward through fear, risking their lives and refusing to give up, to protect the ones they loved. That was humanity's true courage, and Lucas had thrown it away. Frey's fury exploded and his spell power burst out. Even shaken, the old man called it ignorance. Everyone knew another battle was starting. Lucas could cast with a single finger and no chant. That was an apostle's power, far beyond normal magic. Pure lightning wasn't something magic alone could make. It came from a demigod. With that gift, he had gone beyond the 7 stages. Lightning flashed overhead and storm clouds gathered. This wasn't human power, it was the demigods. The elf asked what they should do next. Frey ordered them to split up. Liamson would stay in front and protect the others. Camel would back him up with magic. Lord Mickle would stay behind and block the enemy's divine power. Then Frey turned to Isabel and pulled his loyal friend into a silent hug. He whispered something in her ear, and it left her stunned. He turned away. There was no time to argue. Any complaints would have to wait until they survived. Frey braced himself for the fight. The front line charged Lucas. He answered with one-handed magic, sending beams out like flowing water. The elf moved first and dodged them. But when he tried to strike back, Lucas raised a shield. A burst of light flashed, and the elf was blasted away near Frey. The others readied for the next move. Frey leaped at Lucas and cast blazing earth. Master Mikkel watched in horror. The ground split apart, showing how terrifying Frey's power really was. He began to wonder who this boy truly was. Frey was fighting to kill. He rushed forward across the broken ground, while Lucas defended, telling him not to waste his strength. No matter how strong he was, he couldn't break through the lightning barrier. That was the demigod's pure power. Frey wasn't shaken. He used flame impact to close the gap, then followed with piercing ice. Still, it seemed pointless. Nothing could touch Lucas. The situation was getting desperate. Their plan had been for Frey to attack while the others distracted Lucas. But now, every attack was centered on Frey. Camel worried he couldn't keep this up much longer, but Isabel said things were still on track. Lucas was trying to measure Frey's strength, so if the others split off, he'd think they were just bait. Stormcloud was feeding him endless power. As long as it stayed, he couldn't be beaten. So, the real goal was to destroy the cloud. Frey was the bait, and Isabel had to join Camel and Lord Mickle. He had trusted her with his life. Now, it was time to move. He told Michael and Camel to gather as much mana as they could. The battle would be decided by them. Meanwhile, Frey kept attacking. He fired off spell after spell, but Lucas stayed protected behind his barrier. None of it left even a scratch. Even so, Lucas knew Frey had surpassed the 7th stage. Since the boy looked under 20, Lucas decided he had to kill him now before he became a bigger threat. Frey launched a fireball next. He knew his attacks weren't working, but he kept going. Then Lucas realized why Frey was blocking his view. That let him spot the other 3 aiming for the cloud, and he moved to stop them. Isabel saw at once that he'd figured it out. A spell struck all 3 of them, and Frey shouted a warning, but they were already down, barely able to move. Lucas formed an energy sphere to finish them off. Their plan was falling apart because he had seen through it. It almost seemed too late to win. Then Liamson jumped in and stopped Lucas from casting the final blow. Frey called out an alarm for his friend. The dark elf held on as long as he could, while Lucas raised his barrier again. Frey ran to check on the others, but they told him they were fine, and to focus on Lucas. They still had to destroy that cloud. Liamson kept up the fierce fight until Lucas knocked him back. Lucas was getting angrier by the second. He hit Liamson with a heavy spell, then seized him by the throat. He couldn't understand why they kept fighting when they couldn't win. He said he'd grant the elf's wish and kill him. No one here would leave alive, but Liamson quietly caught his staff with his feet and jabbed Lucas in the chest, drawing blood. The barrier threw him away, yet he saw the wound he'd made, even if it seemed like it changed nothing. Lucas stepped closer, saying nothing could beat him. Then a strange force rose from the ground and made him turn. The mana gathering there was enormous, beyond what should be possible. Frey knew this wasn't the time to hold back. He would use everything he had to protect the others. What came next could be very dangerous. He shouted for Liamson to run. The elf retreated at once, and a massive blast of fire rushed at Lucas, burning through everything in its path. Flames spread across the area. Frey's power was overwhelming, but he realized he had spent all his mana. The elf tried to shield himself from the blast. When it ended, a giant crater remained. He could only stare at Frey's strength, but Lucas was still alive. He lost an arm and swore he'd kill Frey for that. Then he noticed the boy was out of mana. To Lucas, that was an amateur mistake that showed the gap between them. Frey still refused to give up and rushed straight at him. Even with no mana left, he would fight that pathetic old man. The master was amazed that he still hadn't broken. Lucas's barrier was unstable, and Frey knew he couldn't let it recover. Lucas didn't bother arguing and attacked again, but Frey dodged enough to avoid taking the full hit. He got in close and punched Lucas in the stomach. Pain twisted the man's face. Frey brought his hands together for another spell and blasted Lucas away. Smoke covered the area. Lucas said the boy couldn't be human. Frey shot back that Lucas wasn't human anymore either. Just a worm the demigod used. Lucas's body stopped moving for a moment. It looked like he was losing and he couldn't accept that. With his one remaining arm, he tried to pull more power from the sky. As long as the cloud remained, his mana was endless. He recovered fully. He planned to burn everything down. But then a kick slammed into him. The elf had appeared beside him, laughing at his confidence. He knocked Lucas flat. At the same time, the other three kept working to destroy the cloud. They were close now. Frey and Liamson kept Lucas busy. Even though he was weakened and down an arm, he still had plenty of mana. He suddenly struck both of them and sent them flying. Frey crashed hard, but stayed alert. Lucas pinned him with a foot and said he'd slice him apart, then burn him to death. But the next second changed everything. A huge power rose around them. It was the storm the three had created. Their combined attack finally complete. The master poured in his elven power. The elder used his instrument to call the elements, and Isabel brought it all under control. Exhausted, they knew they had done it. Lord Mickle still felt some sorrow for his old friend, even as Lucas's body broke apart before them. With his last words, he begged the demigod to save him. Lights began falling from the sky. As Lucas's body broke apart, the battle finally came to an end. Even then, Mickle asked why he had betrayed them. His old friend was turning to ash. Lucas said the demigod had promised to save humanity. He would cure disease, end short lifespans, and raise people to a higher state. Frey wanted to stop it for good, but was held back. Mickle still wanted to speak to what was left of Lucas. Shaking, he asked for one more moment, but the apostle wanted none of his pity. Mickle still believed there might be a way to bring his friend back. Then he gently reached for his hand. Lucas immediately grew suspicious. Even while dying, he tried to finish his mission and grabbed Lord Mickle. Everyone rushed over, yelling for him to get away. Flames burst across the area, and a huge explosion tore through the crater. When it cleared, both were gone without a trace. Lucas had escaped, taking Lord Mickle with him. Isabel was horrified by what just happened. In tears, she refused to accept the death of such a kind man. Frey agrees and realizes something is deeply wrong. The whole world is twisted and they have to fix it themselves. It was a warning to all of them. Anyone could be next. Frey says, even alone, keep fighting to the end. The next day in the magic tower, Frey sat on his bed, thinking about everything when someone knocked. Isabel tells him Lady Camel went to visit the Peace Founder bracelets. That he understands what that means while staring at the item in his hand. It was a crystal found in the Apostles, remains meant for Professor Adelia. Quiet and thoughtful, Isabel sits beside him. She was still badly shaken. I think it was the first time she'd seen a companion die right in front of her. Lord Mickle belonged to the Peace Founder bracelets, a group not made up only of witches. Frey remembers talking with the old man. Their secret group was short on members and could recruit almost anyone. He had even said Frey would be welcomed gladly. The Peace Founder bracelets was smaller than the circles of contractors and summoners, but its influence was still huge. Mr. Alton was the contractor of the Barbarians of Greed and also a Grand Duke of the demon world. When Mickle noticed Frey's interest in demons, he was surprised. Hard, Grand Dukes were proud creatures who saw humans as bugs, and making a contract with one was almost impossible. Frey had only seen Iris do it. Thinking about Master Alton made him wonder what kind of person he was. Frey decides to dig deeper into the Peace Founder bracelets. Right then, someone knocks again. Frey stands to answer it. Professor Adelia had come to see him, and he says he was just about to find her. She's surprised to see someone else in his room. Isabel wasn't just a guest. Adelia tells him Elder Ulan is looking for him. Hearing it was the master of the magic tower, Frey's interest rises at once. In his office, the man says he's heard a lot about Frey. He introduces himself as Julan Montivo, the master of the third magic tower. Frey doesn't know him, but politely says it's an honor to meet him. Julan stands and says he read Fraser's report from the mission 4 days earlier, and that it described the Apostles' powers very well. Still, he adds that the death of Master of Earth Mickle was a terrible loss, since he had been loyal and devoted. Those words make Isabel even sadder. Even with the report, the Apostles' identity was still unknown. Julan says they were too hasty. They should have waited for Vice Master Lucas before leaving. Frey listens quietly. At last, Julan asks how Mickle spent his final moments. Frey thinks for a second and says Mickle stayed faithful and loyal until the very end. A man with real principles. Looking out at the seagulls. Julan calls to his lost friend. Then he asks Frey to succeed as the new Master of Earth. The professor is stunned. No one that young had ever become Master of Earth. The youngest before this was Michelle of the Blake family, who got the title at 26. The Blake family was full of geniuses, but Frey still hadn't answered. If he accepted the role, many things would become easier. He'd get private property, a lab, and strong support for his studies. Depending on his project, he could also get rare materials much more easily. The professor is thrilled until Frey turns it down. He doesn't want to be Master of Earth. Julian asks if he wants to join the circle instead, but Frey says no to that too. Julian is curious. He says he respects the choice. As they walk down the stairs, the professor keeps trying to change Frey's mind about becoming Master of Earth. Annoyed, she says he's too young to understand everything. While she talks, Frey remembers something. He wants to show her something in his lab full of rare items. She grows curious when she sees it. It was something left by an apostle. She had no idea Frey had defeated one. After hearing about Master Mikkel's death, she assumed Frey had run away right after. Explains that the small stone holds a demigod's sacred power, but right now it's only pretty and useless. If refined properly, not even a dragon's heart could match it. Frey asks if he can leave it with her, but she doesn't see what she's supposed to do with it. A little uneasy, he asks if she can help him with it. She smiles, then her face turns serious, calling it madness. She says she'll keep the object in her care. Later, Frey stands beside the dark elf. Several people were gathered in the hall. He happily greets Camel. She slips past and whispers about a scary man from the Peace Founder bracelets. Arnon Dujan's warning Frey to be careful because his temper is just as ugly as his face. The man snaps at her for speaking another language. Angry, he demands to know why they're whispering like rats. Then he points at Frey and realizes he's the young man who joined Mikkel during the Apostle subjugation. Curious, he tells Frey to explain what happened. Frey replies that everything is already in the report. The old man is outraged that a kid would answer him like that. Liamson starts getting annoyed with the elder. Frey says he isn't part of the Peace Founder bracelets, so he has no duty to answer. That only makes the elder angrier, and he finally loses his temper. He can't believe Frey dares speak to him like this. The foul old man is told to calm down. No one wants to repeat themselves, so he forces himself to settle down. Then another man steps forward, lowers his hood, and Frey recognizes him after a long time. Without emotion, Frey says, "It's been a while too." It was his brother, Heinz Blake. The two face each other in silence. Heinz brings up the rumours about Frey's closeness with Perun. He says Frey seems very different now, and those changes prove the Blake blood is in him after all. Yet Frey doesn't really get what he means. Heinz Blake was the second son of the Blake family, the middle brother who had helped Shepard confirm Frey's identity. Frey still couldn't tell what Heinz really wanted. Heinz apologizes for the old man's outburst earlier. Then he says, someone from the family will likely come and warns Frey to reject them. The Blakes were in danger wherever they went. Frey remembers that Isaka Blake was the one who first contacted the demigod. Getting to the point, he asks what Heinz wants. He glances aside. Frey can't understand why he's suddenly acting like an older brother when he never treated him like a real person before. Heinz couldn't feel Frey's contempt, but Frey still had those memories. And this man was one reason Frey had once lost hope. Disgusting to see him act like a brother. Only now, after Frey became important, Heinz answers in just a few words. He says he doesn't regret what he did before, and wishes Frey had never learned magic. That only leaves Frey more confused. As he walks away, Heinz only warns him not to trust the circle too much. Frey tells him to wait, but an old bearded man appears instead. It was Alexandro, the Blake family's butler. Even after Heinz's warning, Frey didn't expect someone from the family so soon. He remembers Heinz saying Shepard had talked about their father. The conversation starts awkwardly while the butler studies him in silence. Aside from growing up, Frey seemed unchanged, and the butler wonders if the rumours about his ties to Perun and June are false. Looking away, the man says the master has summoned him and he must return to the estate, but Frey refuses to go. He says he has important work and can't see his father now. The butler is shocked that he would ignore the master's order. Frey firmly repeats that his duties can't wait, so the butler concludes he really has changed. He leaves, saying they'll be waiting at the estate. After that, Frey keeps up his usual act, then drops it once the butler is out of sight. He reaches for one of the vials. A voice comments that it was hard to make. The professor explains that electricity is the hardest element to process, and it cost her hundreds of gold. Of course, she'd be paid back for the work. She proudly says she never took a single coin from a student. In return, She offers him an assistant job, but he still says no. He knew it was an elixir, but not what it was for. It was actually condensed electrical energy. If opened carelessly, it could be dangerous. Still, the professor has a feeling Frey will find a use for it later. Back in his room, he meditates for a while. Then, he uncapsules and drinks all of it. The energy starts spreading through the room. Soon, it covers his whole body. He keeps meditating while the particles drift around him. With his eyes shut, he focuses only on that energy. Control had grown so much that almost his entire body could now store mana. When night comes, Frey calls Isabel over. Then a tiny cat-like creature appears. Before long, Isabel is charmed by it. She says, "It's so cute." Her heart almost stopped. The little thing was darkening. A shadow spirit. She can't believe Frey made a contract with it so fast. No one would expect a shadow spirit to look like that. So adorable. Because of that, Isabel decides to learn shadow spirit techniques as quickly as she can. Frey had calmed the frozen river's energy and learned a lot about the demigod. He had also gotten much better with spiritual powers. Now his next goal was to leave this place. Isabel would take care of the preparations. She asks if he's planning to take the circle entrance exam. The great tower stands in the distance. Back in his room, Frey packs his things. Then, something odd catches his attention. A strange energy is coming from outside the door, but it doesn't feel hostile. He opens it and finds someone waiting there. The girl asks if he is Frey Blake. He studies her carefully. That coat stirs old memories. She apologizes for the sudden visit and introduces herself as Vinian Arento, master of the Trauman Ring Circle. Soon, tea and food are set out. The three sit down quietly. As she sips her tea, Vinian says she came to invite Frey to join her circle. Getting invited before the test was common enough, but when a gifted newcomer showed up, circles tried to reach them first. Isabel finds it funny hearing him called a talented rookie. Then Vinian adds that the invitation includes the redhead too. Word of their battle with the Apostle had spread, and people were focused on their connection. Vinnie laughs and says she only followed orders. Even then, Frey keeps staring at her coat. It looked just like the one he wore 4,000 years ago, maybe altered by a magic tool. But that wasn't what troubled him most. He asks if Master Vinion is a dragonist. At once, tea spills from her cup, clearly shaken. She asks why he would think that. He explains that dragons don't have a mana compartment. Their hearts store transcendental power, letting them take in an element directly. She may have a mana compartment, but it wasn't well refined. Frey knew dragons very well. Frey had already told Isabel that 4,000 years ago, Lucas had a dragon as his master. Back in the conversation, Vinian says he was partly right. She is a half-dragon, born from both dragon and human blood. Later, they talk outside his room about what just happened. Frey watches Vinian walk away. Curious, Isabel asks what he's going to do. She says the Trauman rings seem to be in bad shape, even if Vinian tried to sound positive. Frey also noticed she was lacking as a circle master. Still, the whole meeting had been unexpected. Two keep packing their bags. Isabel asks if he's interested in the Trauman rings, but he says he doesn't want to get dragged into their politics. What mattered most was learning how to gather power into one place. With their bags on, they're ready to leave. Instead of building one circle, Lucas Trauman would become the center. Isabel realizes he's still the same as ever. As they reach the stairs, they notice a disturbance in the hall. An old man is arguing with Master Vinian, and she can't even push back. He spots Frey. He proudly says he holds noble rank. Jerome Bernard introduces himself as Master of the Lucid Swords and Steve Zer as Master of the Strules. It seems they had arrived too late for the visit. The old man asks if Frey plans to join the Trauman rings. Frey gives no clear answer. He only makes fun of the whole mess. To him, they all seem the same. Another master asks Frey to visit them after he finishes with the Trauman rings. He hands over a teleport scroll linked to the Stroh's headquarters. The other one, even without a scroll, invites him to the kingdom of Luan Abel in Geothimbol or Silkit. After that, both men leave. Frey turns back to the matter at hand. He asks if the old man wants to recruit him too. The man says they should talk somewhere private and asks that Master Vinian stay out of it. So, they move to another room, leaving the half-dragon girl behind. Before Frey goes, she tries to warn him. With a smile, she tells him to be careful. Frey decides Isabel should stay in the hall while he goes alone with the old man. He asks Master Vinian to wait a little longer and says he'll return soon. She agrees and says she'll stay right there. Soon, the two are alone in a dark forest. The old man now feels far more mysterious. It was a strange place for recruitment, and he admits he was never planning to recruit a fraud like Frey. Anyway, Frey laughs and asks what he really wants. The man turns and asks how he managed to defeat an apostle. Power surges from his body as he demands to see Frey strengthen himself. The force under his feet cracks the ground. Then his magic makes branches shoot toward Frey. The thorny vines wrap around him. The man says not all 7th star mages are equal, and he won't end up like the apostle. Frey mocks him and says he's right. Then he destroys every plant at once. He had infused his mana with attributes, and his spell shattered the thorns. Genza had no right to call himself a 7-star mage. He only had raw mana and nothing else. Without even moving a finger, Frey's power was overwhelming. Angry, the old man prepares another spell. He sends out waves of fire and starts forming a circle in front of him. It gets cannelled before it's finished. This was much harder than blocking flying blades. Ice locks around his feet, then spreads over his whole body he had lost and had nowhere to escape. Still, Frey doesn't plan to kill him. Instead, he gives him a test. By morning, it will kill him unless he can melt it himself. If he's truly a 7-star mage, the old man, furious, refuses to be tested by some rude kid. Frey doesn't react at all. The feeling unsettles the old man. He couldn't understand how someone so defiant could still carry such dignity. He says Frey will have to kill him. Without changing his tone, Frey says that's the only advice he'll give. Then he turns away, trusting the old man to survive. Meanwhile, the girls wait for him. They're relieved when Frey finally returns. He apologizes for making them wait. Isabel asks if everything is all right, though what she really wants to know is what happened to Mr. Duyanzar. Frey tells her not to worry. He won't die, even if he can't break free. The ice will melt by tomorrow, which may be even more humiliating. Soup is poured into a bowl. It smells so good that Frey is instantly tempted. Vignan offers some to Isabel too. She seems very used to camping. It's part of her everyday life. Impressed by how fast she works, Frey asks for another serving. The former circle master was Orsa Lorento, Vignan's father. Frey asks how he died, even though it's a rude thing to ask. Vignan silently stares into the fire and explains that demigods have ranks, and the highest one is called the Lord. That title brings back a memory for Frey. Among the demigods, the strongest are often called apocalypses. Only 3 of them had been properly studied. They were sword, poison, and death. 2 years ago, Vignan's father was killed by the demigod of death. Isabel quietly shares her grief for Vignan's loss, but Frey is stuck on one word: apocalypse. He knew the demigod of poison, an old man with terrifying power. The next day, barely any sunlight made it through the trees. As they walk, Vignan says, "This is the Francisco forest, where the Trauman Ring's hideout is hidden." Frey is impressed by the barrier strength. Her father built it, and she can only repair it. Frey guesses the former master had to be at least an 8-star mage. Biniam was probably 6-star, talented but trained by human methods. He even wonders if life might have been easier if she'd been born fully human. He catches himself thinking that, and doesn't quite understand why he's being so harsh after all her effort. When they reach the village, they find the Trauman Ring's home. It looked far too poor for a Serral hideout. Someone calls out to Master Vinian. The Honourable Ghiselin reports what happened while she was gone. He says they lost an artifact war to cursed beasts that looked like hyenas with basilisk tails. Frey and Isabel listen closely. The Trauman Rings were in serious trouble. When Galileen notices Frey, he apologises for the poor welcome. This time the stolen artifact was the Red Ring, one of the 7 rings made by Lucas. Nearby, a few people watched them arrive. They say Master Vinian wasn't around when they came to greet her. Apparently, he'd been meeting often lately. Since the girls looked buried in work, they offered to help, but things were so busy there wasn't even time for tea. Vinian looks clearly annoyed. She apologises for the uncomfortable situation. The artifact war was a contest where a legendary artifact was put up as the prize. To Frey, gambling with artifacts seemed foolish, but it had started in desperate times as a way to build friendship between circles. The man says that way of thinking should have died out already. But, because the war was called a way to build friendship, he couldn't refuse. The basilisk tail. A bunch of hyena-like bastards had been hunting the Trauman Ring's artifacts, now that the circle was weak. Even small and mid-sized circles were taking shots at them when they got the chance. The situation was clearly bad. Actually, it was worse than the rumours made it sound. They had less than 1/10 of their old numbers, and the few gifted members were away on missions. Frey realises all they've done is complain, even though they were the ones who invited him. Seeing his look, Isabel asks him to check something out. It was a huge statue nearby. The figure held a book and a staff. The plaque said it was Lucas Trauman. Frey walks over and gently touches it. Then someone asks if he's a fan of Sir Lucas. He turns and sees a boy coming over. Frey says he wouldn't call himself a fan. The boy introduces himself as Pen, the fourth honourable of the Traumon Rings. The two greet him. As soon as they meet, Frey wants to ask something, and he doesn't wait long. He asks why they stay in a circle that's almost fallen apart. Pen is confused at first, but Frey means not just this circle, most of the members too. With their skills, many of them could easily join other circles. The boy is taken aback. Isabel quickly tells Frey to watch his words, but Pen laughs and says he gets the point. Spreading out to other circles would definitely be the easiest choice, but if they did that, the Traumon Rings would truly end. Every circle honours its own hero, and they didn't want to lose the meaning they started with. He explains that Lucas Traumon is the only person in history ever called a Grand Mage. Hearing that, Frey feels a quiet sense of pride. Pen says Lucas opened a whole new road for magic. 4,000 years ago, mages and magic warriors hated each other enough to kill each other, and witches were treated like heretics. No one wanted near them. But Sir Lucas Traum was different. Again, he believed anyone walking the path of magic was a friend. Mages, witches, and magic warriors all rejected him, but he never stopped trying to build a world where all of them belonged. That belief became the teaching of their circle, so even if they're weak now, they won't quit until they gather their scattered people again. Pian says that if Lucas were alive, that's what he'd do too. Then the boy awkwardly apologizes, saying he got carried away. Frey stays silent, but his face shows pride. Isabel likes the story too. At the end, Frey says Lucas would be happy to see successors like them. Pen only gets embarrassed and brushes it off. The pair greet 2 more people. Then they leave for a place the circle members don't know. The only thing Vinny knows is that Frey asked where Basilisk's tail was and about the rules each circle followed. To the others, it looked like he cared more about the artifacts than the failing Traumon Rings. But the girl doesn't buy that. Something else is bothering her. He had also asked if an outsider could request a challenge in an artifact war. Elsewhere, some men mock the Traumon Rings, saying they'll keep the war going until they've taken everything. That then, a group of wanderers asks for Rounder Antoine. They've come to issue an artifact war challenge. Stepping forward, Frey asks if refusing a challenge would break the rules. Everyone is stunned. They got through the barrier. Frey mocks it. He barely noticed it was there. It was so weak. He thought it was just a cloud of bugs. Rounder. Antoine starts getting annoyed. The boy looked young, but he was clearly no ordinary mage. Probably at least 6th stage. A man soon asks what artifact they want to wager. Frey tosses over the communal dagger. It was an item with huge value. A Meathal weapon from the Age of Light carrying the sword god's vengeance. Another man realizes this guest is the real deal. Interested, calls Frey to come with him. Before it starts, he asks if Frey knows the rules of artifact war. A challenge can't be refused. Both sides must bet 1 artifact, and there can only be 3 challenges in a day, and if someone dies, there are no penalties. The first match, they put up a red ring. The first fighter is Alan FX. The two face each other and wait for the signal. Alan starts warming up, showing off his strikes. He was a magic warrior, and his opponent was Frey, a mage. Alan figures a chanting mage has no chance, so he declares Frey's life over. Sure, 1 punch will do it. Then the match begins. Before he can land a hit, Alan drops to his knees. Everyone freezes in shock. It makes no sense. Frey had beaten Alan with a 2nd level spell. One man starts wondering if Frey has magical vision, so he doesn't need to memorize spells. But magical vision burns through mana fast. After taking the ring, Frey turns to leave. The man is still stunned by what he saw. He assumes Frey is leaving because his mana is nearly gone. And that is exactly what Frey wanted them to think. Soon after, he offers the Kelvin Stone and Winged Boots as the next wager. Unable to refuse, they put up the red ring and the Kung Vunal dagger. The man thinks the trap is perfect. He pulls Kilo aside to talk in private. He says Frey must be trying to win fast because magical vision drained his mana. If they stretch the fight out, he'll definitely lose. The killer should open with a defensive barrier and force Frey to waste the rest. That kid won't beat Killer's experience. Killer says he'll take the win. After settling the plan, both sides step up. Killer keeps the advice in mind. Match starts, and Frey sends out a wave of ice. Killer raises his barrier right away, already thinking he's won until a hit blasts him backward. He can't believe it. The whole circle is shocked again. Kill is thrown into the air and his staff goes flying. He slams into the ground. Now only 1 match remains. The last opponent is Rounder Antoine. The final fight begins. Antoine summons a battle spirit. Frey gets ready too. Since he'd used magical vision 3 times in a row, everyone thought his mana had to be low. Antoine throws all his strength into a punch and charges straight in. He plans to finish it up close. At the same time, more arrows fly out. He quickly realizes he can't dodge them. Then it hits him. It wasn't magical vision at all. Frey had only been using simple ice arrows. Antoine can't believe a low-level spell could hit this hard. The only answer is simple. Either they were weak, or Frey was absurdly strong. Rounder. Antoine flies into a rage. He changes tactics and orders his men to grab Isabel. That distracts Kira and gives the others their opening. The men rush in with everything they have. At this point, Antoine doesn't care about artifact war anymore. Now he just wants everyone dead. Fills the area as Frey calls out to the girl. The attackers are stunned to see him still standing. He doesn't even have a scratch. Then someone strikes back, dropping the enemies in pain. It was Isabel, calmly using her self-defense skills. The two are together, and the fight swings their way. Antoine still sees with anger. Frey calls him out for hiding behind his men and trying to save himself whenever he faces someone stronger. Each word makes Antoine even angrier, but before he can act, his neck is cut. A wind blade drops him to the ground. Frey laughs and tells him to be careful. He almost died. Antoine collapses completely worn out. Then another person appears, Master Farrick, demanding to know what happened. She had pink eyes and a cruel look. Truts, this was the master of Basilisk's tail. She scolds Frey for being disrespectful, but then she feels something off. A pressure-like needle stabbing into her heart. She introduces herself as Farikavat and asks why he's here. Frey says that's what he wants to know too. What was the purpose of her circle? The men watch in silence, judging the boy, Rounder. Antoine cries out to his master, kneeling. She says their goal was to free humanity from the demigod's grip. One man can't understand why she suddenly seems like a servant before some rookie. Frey keeps pressing and asks what demigods really are. She says they're transcendent beings beyond human understanding, powerful enough to wipe out a city with a gesture. Then Frey realizes she knows exactly what they are, and even so, she still chose to build power and influence this way. Angered, he starts freezing everything around them. Farrick warns her people not to move, or their bodies will be torn apart. Still on her knees, she starts to beg. She asks him not to destroy her circle, but Frey says he wants the master's life. The woman is stunned. Still, she accepts as long as the circle is allowed to survive. Power gathers in one of her hands. Her subordinates scream for her to stop. She's already made her choice. Frey steps closer with one hand raised. She bows her head and accepts death. He looks at her for a moment, his expression softening. Then he changes his mind, realizing she could still be useful. He melts all the ice. With the ice gone, no one dies. He orders the master to return every artifact taken from the Trauman rings. She obeys at once, then smiling, he says he has one more order. Ferric waits nervously for what's next. Frey wants the location of every small and mid-sized circle in the area. Master Vignan waits at the circle gate. She has been out there so long she might catch a cold. She wonders if Frey found the Basilisk tails safely. Her subordinate tells her not to lose hope. They may still build good ties later. While they talk, Frey walks up quietly. An arrival startles them both. He casually says he was just out for a long walk. Later, everyone gathers around a table. All eyes are on Frey. He says he has something important to tell them. When he starts speaking, his voice is calm and slow. He plans to remove the demigods from this world. To do that, he needs power and influence. He points out that the circles are in bad shape, each one only caring about itself. And right now, none of them can change that alone. So, the plan is to make the Trauman rings the center. Not just for small and medium circles, but even the three great ones. Vignan tries to object, but Frey cuts past it. He only wants to know if they have the will to do it or not. He sets down his backpack and warns them. The road ahead will hurt so much they'll miss their Easy's average lives. Still, if they endure and stay firm, he promises to take them to the top. Everyone is stunned when he reveals the stolen artifacts. Now they understand why he left. In one day, they forced 6 small and medium circles to submit and agree to unite under the Trauman rings. He really did all that in a single day, but he adds that he will not hand those items over to them. He said that this was simply his thanks for their warm welcome. Then gives Master Vignan more time to think. As he turns away, he says she has one day to decide, but she stops him. Rising from her seat, she asks one thing. Is it truly possible to make the Trauman rings that central power? Frey swears on his life that he will make it happen. As everyone listens, an announcement is made. It is still early and they are all tired and sleepy. Some think the group might be disbanded. Then, Master Vignan begins her speech and announces a new rounder for the circle. The members are confused. Most of them do not even know Frey's name. They only know he showed up a few days ago. He introduces himself as Frey Blake and notices many are uneasy seeing someone so young become a rounder again. He knows this decision will bring plenty of pushback. Then he adds one more thing. None of them are qualified. Vignan gives a faint smile while the others are shocked by how bold he is. Frey goes on. Everyone here is so weak that even someone his age can become a rounder. The members cannot make sense of it. Then he jumps down and lands right in the middle of them. He will accept complaints but not words. Anyone who can damage his collar gets his rounder seat and his earrings. A frightened boy cannot figure out what Frey is doing. The man beside him has a guess. He thinks Frey is testing the members himself. Bayan adds that he is drawing all their frustration toward him. Then Frey starts the challenge and calls for the first opponent. Fiogunther, a mage, steps forward. The boy gets ready to attack and asks if Frey is not even going to take a proper stance. Frey taunts him. If his opponent is good enough, he'll take his hands out of his pockets. The arrogance is unbelievable. Fekru fires a strong fireball, but it does not leave a scratch. Frey's defense is too strong, and the fireball breaks apart. Everyone is shocked because he did it without an incantation. Fetch panics. He thought Frey's level was about the same as his. Fetchu clearly specializes in fire magic, and he has trained in it for years. Its biggest strength is raw destruction. At the same level, fire magic usually hits harder than other attributes. Fu can tell the boy spent countless days perfecting that fireball, but he is wasting too much mana to keep its shape. A perfect form does not make it stronger. He should focus on power instead. Taking the advice seriously, Fo asks how to do that, but Fracture tells him his real task is to master fear. He recalls a mage friend who once suffered terrible burns over his body. Everyone thought he would never use magic again. He overcame it and became a fire mage. The boy listens carefully, and the others start to understand too. That mage succeeded because he had truly experienced both sides of fire. The boy suddenly smiles wide. What matters is how he pictures it. If he can truly imagine the nature of fire, he will find the path. He thanks Frey with all his heart. A man nearby asks why he is so happy after losing, but the boy says his friend would understand if he ever faced Frey. To him, it feels like a whole new world has opened and he fully trusts the hero now. Next, a man in battle gear steps up. He raises his shield and sword, but before he can act, a strike bursts up from the ground and hits him. Later, he returns with the same conclusion. The boy was right, and Rounder Frey knows the right road. In just one day, Frey wins over the circle members. Now, everyone is lively and excited, holding up 3 fingers. He says he will need 3 months to make the Trauman rings stronger, including Master Vignan, Gizelin, and Pin. After those 3 months, they will hold a friendly competition with nearby small and medium circles. It will not be a war over artifacts, but a way to build better relations. Even so, they need to win as many matches as possible. To revive the circle, they first need enough victories that no other circle can complain. Pan says that sounds almost impossible, but Frey already warned them they are heading into hell. Elsewhere, Frey begins training Master Vignan. She starts releasing her magic. Just as he suspected, she forced herself to make a mana compartment. She had believed magic was impossible without one, but dragons do not store mana that way. They draw it straight from nature. So, she has to break that compartment, which means releasing all the mana inside it. Frey places a hand on her back and starts drawing the energy out. She drops to her knees and leans forward, crying out as her mana drains away. After she settles down, they continue. Pushes her back again and tells her to focus on releasing the mana she still has left. She gathers herself and tries. Even so, she is clearly anxious. As he presses harder, the mana starts pouring out. Everything inside her is being released. The compartment is breaking apart. Frey warns her the next step will hurt a little. Slowly, the compartment begins to crack. He is not sure she can endure it. Vignan struggles while he keeps going. Her hands grip her pants tightly. Frey stays focused. He knows he may be worrying too much. When it is finally over, she collapses from exhaustion. Then she gets annoyed when she hears this was only the first step. The whole process will take a month. Still, he already warned her this training would be hell. Her eyes fill with tears and worry takes over. Soon, a loud scream echoes through the area. Pen is next in Frey's training. He is helpless against Frey's speed and agility. Frey grabs his hand to stop the pointless attacks, but Pin keeps resisting and refuses to quit. He tries using his legs, but his kick still cannot reach Frey's face. He keeps trying anyway. Frey blocks every attack with ease. It is like punching a rock. After a while, the spar ends. The boy bends over, gasping for air. Skills are below even a second-ass martial artist. Still, he seems pretty proud, which means he has room to grow. His style is the White King's Fist, a simple art without tricky or strange moves. That is why he struggles in long fights. People can read his patterns too easily. Frey tells him the problem is simple. He is weak, and the style only stands out because it is an old classic. Frustrated, Pen asks how he can grow stronger. Frey says there is no shortcut for magical warriors. They have to improve step by step. Pen lowers his head, thinking it will take a long time to become more skilled, but Frey says he can help him take those steps faster. Tears run down Pen's face. He ends up flat on the ground when water is splashed on him. So drained, it is like he has not slept at all. He begs Frey to just kill him, but more than half the training is still left. Later, two comrades stand in the forest. The Honourable Gizolan waits for orders from the new rounder. Frey hands him a dagger and tells him to use it. Kamanul's dagger is an artifact from the Era of Light, made of mithril and packed with special powers. It is one of a kind. Gazalan laughs and says he is a mage. Even so, Frey knows he has used a blade for years and never stopped training. He figured that out from the calluses on the man's hands, the marks of long sword practice. His plan is to turn him into a magical swordsman. His magic level is only level 5, but with that dagger, he can go beyond it. Gizolan takes the weapon with care and curiosity. He says he will spend as long as needed learning to use it, even if he lacks confidence. Frey tells him not to worry about that. He will teach him everything he knows and build up his confidence. By nightfall, Gazalan enters the room, barely able to stand. To him, it felt like pure hell. Payne notices his friend came back, but he's too drained to even turn his head. A moment later, the other person drops to the floor too. Neither of them can move their arms or stand up. They can't even make it to the bathroom. Then, Master Vignian appears at the door, groaning about her stomach. She soon falls beside them. Now, all three complain about the pain all over their bodies. Frey shows up excitedly, announcing that evening, training starts after a 5-minute meal break, but none of them move at all. Then a voice calls for Master Vignian, saying he's back from his mission. The boy at the door stares in confusion at the scene. It was the Honourable Ozak. Seeing them sprawled on the floor, he blurts out that Frey is a murderer. He pulls his sword and rushes to fight. He can't believe this happened while he was gone. He swings at Frey at once, but Frey blocks it and calmly asks his name. Ozak is still furious. Sure, Frey attacked his friends. Then, Professor Adelia recognizes Frey and Isabel. Vinian explains that Azak had been sent out on a mission for the Trauman rings that helps Frey remember who Azak is from the floor. The woman tells him to put his sword down. She introduces Frey Blake as the new router, with Isabel Tristney as his assistant. The two are stunned that such young people hold those titles. Professor Adelia is especially angry. She refuses to believe Frey is really the router. Azak quickly apologizes, saying he didn't know who Frey was. Adelia still can't accept that he got such an important post. After thinking for a moment, Frey asks if she used to be part of the Trauman rings. Then he calls her Adelia and says she should speak to him more formally now that he outranks her. She gets furious and tries to hit him, but Frey was only joking. As Zack moves on to his report, saying he found clues about the heir to the king of magical warriors. In the end, he says he managed to track him down. Everyone leans in wanting to hear more. As Zack gets ready to explain the mission, he says the king's personality was every bit as hard to deal with as expected. Then he lifts his shirt and shows a scar, shocking everyone. XP explains that those people didn't care much about the circles and believed martial arts mattered more than anything else. He buttons his shirt back up. Frey turns to Isabel and calls her over. He asks how long it would take to reach the Great Rhino's jungle. Just that using the southern route and the teleport stone at Fillet, it would take under 4 days. That gives Frey a new idea. Fuld is where the Blake estate, his family's main home, was located. Frey calls for Master Venian and puts a hand on the table. He says he's going to meet the heir of the magical warriors. Still, everyone knows the trip will be dangerous. Curious, the half-dragon asks when he'll leave, but Frey is already heading out with Isabel beside him. Zack notices how much trust Master Venian puts in Frey. Later that night, under a huge moon, its light spills through the window. Frey stays silent, then finally calls out to his friend, but Isabel already knows what he's going to say. He wants to make the trip alone. Now that the circle's base is set up, someone has to stay and make sure nothing goes wrong. She stands and walks over to him, saying she'll handle his duties so he can focus on the mission. Even so, she's close to tears. As she heads out, she asks him to send word now and then, and if anything happens, she'll come help right away. Frey laughs softly, realizing how much she's grown. After that small laugh, his eyes turn gentle. He thanks her for everything as she leaves in tears. With his pack over his shoulder, he says goodbye to the others. Then, he shuts the door and starts his journey. But at the exit, something strange stops him. All the honoured ones are lined up in a corridor. They crowd around him, begging him to stay a little longer and not leave them behind. Frey thinks they're being way too dramatic. He pats Isabel on the head and jokes that her bad temper will keep the men in line. That makes her give a small smile. Besides, he'll only be gone for a month. Everyone starts crying, remembering their friendly matches with nearby circles. Before leaving, Frey warns them not to lose a single fight. His subordinates answer that they've got it covered. He raises his fist and leaves, saying he can't wait to see them again. That's where remains lie inside a crater. Then a green eye opens. The phoenix's feathers had changed into a magical being with human-like hands and long orange hair like living fire. The woman stands struggling to keep her balance. Her goal is to rule over everything, to become mistress of the mountain range and keep it from being defiled by a Takunda. Clinging to those words, she releases all the power she had stored up. With one jump, she shoots into the sky and races over the land. In Grod, life in the streets goes on as usual. Frey studies himself in a mirror. Energy rises from his hands and he uses magic on his face. After a while, his appearance changes. Now he calls himself Kane Rickstone, a rank C mercenary. Cover is a 26-year-old from Tamigo in the south, working as a 3-star mage. He needed this disguise to move through Philae unnoticed. There were already rumours linking Isaka Blake to a demigod, so for now, Frey planned to stay away from his family. Using that disguise in the streets, he gets stopped by a guard who says his identity checks out. Frey thanks him with a smile and keeps going. Philae was Frey's hometown, and it still felt strangely familiar. In disguise, he heads into a business establishment. Inside, men are eating, drinking, and laughing. The bar is packed with every kind of person. He walks in with confidence, and people quickly notice the powerful mage. Some even think the Vulcan group is finally getting the respect it deserves. At the bar, the girl chews gum and asks if he's here to order a drink. Frey explains that the trip from Philae to the jungle is long, so he wants to save time by taking a carriage. The problem is, he doesn't know any that go that deep. He had mentioned a group that trades with the elves every month, so Frey came disguised as a mercenary. Since they hire mercenaries as guards, he hands the girl his information and says he's here to accept the job. He wants to guard the escort heading to the Great Reynolds jungle. After checking his guild rank, she says the job requires at least rank B. Then she asks if he wants to take a test and rank up. She opens her book to schedule it, but Frey wants to do it right now. So, puts down her pen without writing anything, telling him to follow her. She adds that the fee is 10 silver coins. The two head downstairs. As he walks, Frey keeps studying the place. The corridor below is huge and seems endless. A man is lounging in a chair, and when they enter, he asks why they're there. Smiling, the girl says the mercenary came for the test. Iron explains there are 2 ways to rank up, commission or demonstration. With the first, the evaluator gives you a mission and judges the result. It is a public show of skill, and no one had passed it in the last 100 years. She warns that the judging is extremely strict. Without hesitating, Frey picks the demonstration test. She pops her gum and tells them to begin. The evaluator starts listening closely. Headache even eases when he realizes someone interesting showed up. The 3 stand at the test site. Frey asks if he'll be fighting both of them, but they tell him to attack the wall with magic instead. Explains that breaking it should be impossible because a 5-star mage layered it with barriers. Not even her drunk leader could smash that wall. That man was a rank, so if this kid really broke it, he might deserve a rank too. The 2 are stunned by what he says, then burst out laughing. Frey ignores that and asks Iron to step aside. Wishing him luck, she turns away. Frey gathers his power into a fireball. The moment she senses 5-star magic, she's shocked. He steadies his aim on the wall. The drunk shouts for Iron to get down. Frey fires with full force. Both of them dive to the floor. Smoke fills the area, and when it clears, a huge hole has been blasted through the wall. Seeing that, the leader approves him immediately. Frey is now officially a rank. The man is deeply impressed by him. He introduces himself as Donkey and asks if Frey already belongs to a mercenary group, but Frey says he only wants to join the caravan escort to the Great Rhino's jungle. Donkey finds that suspicious, but says nothing and finishes the approval anyway. Later, rumours spread that Count Isaka may step down as master of the 5th magic tower over drinks. Another man asks if he wasn't already fired. Frey greets them politely. He says he's new around here and wants to learn how things work. To get friendly fast, he offers to pay for everyone's drinks. At first, the men just see him as some brat. Soon, the table is loaded with food, and before long, everyone is talking comfortably. Frigg says he wants to work as a guard at the Blake estate, while one of the men goes on about how pretty the girls there are. Then, he brings up the rumours. A friend claimed he saw several carriages enter the mansion, far too many for a simple supply run. Same friend also said he heard voices inside them that sounded like screams. Fury flashes across Frey's face. Later, sitting alone at the counter, He keeps replaying what he heard. The talk of sacrifices comes back to him, and he starts connecting the pieces. Limbon calls out for Kane Rickstone. Raising his bottle, the man introduces himself as Alcon, leader of the escort team. Alcon says Dunkey told him Kane was a gifted mage and praise like that almost never came from him. Dunkey warns Kane not to relax just because this looks like an easy job. He says the last caravan bound for Renel was wiped out last month, and a mortal being caused the massacre, and monsters like that had been showing up all over the continent. Everyone needed to stay alert. Immortal beings usually move out of pure hatred for the living, but Kane pushes that aside and focuses on his own mission. Soon, the caravan sets out. For the moment, the trip is peaceful with the soldiers riding inside the wagons. Still, Kane senses something off. An old mage keeps staring at him, and he has no idea why. After a while, the man finally looks away. Kane figures everyone here has their own story. Alcon asks how he's doing, and Kane says he's fine. The captain tells him to rest now because the real job starts once they reach the forest. Kane then asks about the man in the carriage. Alcon says his name is Cax, a 5-star mage and a rank mercenary. Around here, people call him Rookie Cax. Later, up at the cabins to rest, Kane sits there lost in thought. While eating, someone calls to him. The old man walks over with his staff. Kane invites him to sit. The man introduces himself as Seals and says he already knows Kane's name. He apologizes for bothering him during dinner, but Kane tells him it's fine. Still eating, he asks what Seals wants. The mage says he sensed the energy of a rare spirit from Kane and asks if he's a spiritualist. Kane realizes he's talking about his dark mane. Instead of answering, he asks if Seals is spiritualist himself. Kane admits he made a contract with a spirit, but says he isn't a spiritualist. He still wants to know how Seals sense that power, since normal people shouldn't be able to. The mage nervously tries to change the subject, and Kane lets it go. He only asks why Seals joined the escort, and the man says he's worried about the immortal being. An immortal appearing near the Great Reynolds was incredibly rare. It hadn't happened for at least 1,000 years. He says that like someone who had actually lived that long. Kane casually tells him to eat his soup before it gets cold. People use illusion magic to change their looks when they want to hide something. In Kayak's case, he seemed to be hiding his identity. With that fake face, Kayak was clearly concealing something. Then someone rushes in to warn Kapalovan that there's trouble. A group of undead had appeared in the southwest and there was no way around that route. They announce a reconnaissance mission. The two mages place enchantments on the team's gear. Kane feels a faint trace of divine power, but not enough for it to come from a demigod. Then the men head out. As they move into the forest, a rotten smell hits them. The undead were close. Everyone draws their swords and gets ready. They charge forward, bracing for whatever waits ahead. But when they arrive, something is wrong. Every undead creature is already dead, even though the team had only been moving for 30 minutes. Frey starts reading the scene. It looked like one person did it and needed less than 10 minutes to wipe them all out. The group is baffled until Frey notices a clue. He realizes he has found the successor of the magic warrior king. The men start to panic. Birds scatter overhead. Seeing how bad this is, Frey warns them to leave at once. Whoever destroyed the undead was terrifying and unbelievably strong. He had wiped them out with a single blow. Then a severed head lands near the soldiers' feet. Frozen in fear, they can't move. A man stands atop the pile of corpses and notices the outsiders. That brute had crushed all his enemies in one move. The captain asks why he killed the undead, but the man cuts him off, move or die. The captain goes silent. That giant was the successor. Frey says it's too dangerous to just leave him alone. Caravans use this road often, so they couldn't leave monsters roaming there, but they also couldn't fight him, so Frey decides to follow him. He would track the man himself and judge whether he was truly a threat. His disguise should be enough. He heads after the stranger and tells the captain to continue the mission. Soon the forest fills with noise. The slaughter of the undead keeps going. The big man refuses to stop. He tightens his fist, then fires off a bladed punch. Suddenly, something attacks from behind. One monster bites at him, but its teeth break against his skin. He kills it with one strike. He doesn't look tired at all. Nearby, Frey watches while leaning against a tree. The big man finds it strange that someone is just watching him. Frey walks up and asks how long he's been learning the magic warrior king's techniques. The man gets angry, thinking he's just another fool from the circles, and Frey says he's from Trauman Rings. The man instantly throws another punch straight at Frey. Smoke bursts out between them. Just hearing the name of that circle made him furious, but Frey is protected by a barrier. Even then, he shows no fear. The giant grabs him by the clothes and lifts him up. Frey stays calm. The man roars that he'd never have anything to do with those circle bastards. It was odd for the successor of the magic warrior king to reject all demigod matters. His anger is obvious. To him, the circles were pigs who only cared about eating well. They wanted no link to people like that. Frey explains the circles had no real plan to subdue the demigods. With a smirk, he says the man is being unfair to actual little piggies. His goal was something else, a reform to gather the scattered powers together. He wanted to unite the broken circles. That makes the big man let go. Now interested, he decides to test Frey's strength. The warrior attacks at once, but Frey avoids the hit. His speed is incredible. The giant rushes forward, smashing through everything in his path. Frey calmly keeps taunting him. He combines two spells, Ice Spear and Windstorm. The two rush each other, but the man breaks through it all with shocking ease. He keeps charging without a scratch. That stubbornness reminded Frey of Cassadine. Then Frey forms a sphere and uses Icy Breath. For the first time, the man looks shocked as his feet freeze to the ground. The attack hits him head-on. He brings his hands together to block using a powerful rock shield. After the clash explodes, Frey drops lightly back to the ground. He asks if they can talk seriously now, but the man is completely frozen. Even so, he refuses to quit, and his eyes change color. With that, he shatters the ice around him and tears himself free from the ground. Then, he leaps at Frey with a huge punch aimed at his face, but Frey is faster and appears behind him. Flat on the ground, the man is impressed by the bull hunting technique. Frey offers a hand, still trying to talk, but the man suddenly punches him. The hit lands on Frey's chin, and then he bolts into the forest. Shocked, Frey chases after him. They race through the forest at crazy speed. Before long, Frey catches up and runs beside him. Then he realizes the man isn't escaping. He's leading him somewhere. It made him even stranger. The technique he used was the Fool's Walk of the magical warrior king, and it was supposed to be taught only to the first successor. Frey had never learned it from anyone. As they run, he learns the man's name is Ivan, and leads him to a place Frey doesn't know, so the Frey keeps following to find out. They finally stop at an old wooden house. Frey jokes that he has no clue what kind of place this is. Ivan shouts to Ricky that he's back. Loud sound erupts from inside and Frey covers his ears. Ivan says that's the only way to wake Ricky. Even then, Frey still doesn't know who he's about to meet. Then he realizes the truth. It was a demigod. Ivan grins at his reaction. For a moment, no one comes out. They can hardly believe it. A real demigod stands before him, asking who Ivan brought along. The figure yawns, clearly just awake. There was no mistake. He really was a demigod. Frey can tell his power is on par with that old man whose poisons were like an apocalypse. Ivan points at Frey and says he's from the circles. The demigod studies him from head to toe. Then he asks whether Ivan finished the task he was given. Thinking ahead, he tells them to come inside and allows the new guest in too, but Frey grabs Ivan's shirt and stops him. He demands to know why the successor of the martial king is working with a demigod. Ivan doesn't answer right away. Depending on what he said, he could die instantly, but Ivan shows no fear of Frey's power. Then he reveals the reason for their alliance. Ricky was actually a traitor, and he wanted to destroy the demigods. Frey doesn't believe him yet. Ivan says he should listen to the whole story before judging, so the two go inside. As Frey steps through, he notices a magical portal. Though the house looks small outside, the inside was enormous. Through spatial distortion, magic that twists space itself to expand a limited area. A normal person would never notice that magic, much less get inside. Ivan didn't know any of that. As Ricky peels a fruit, he tells them to sit. Everyone is surprised Ricky let that stranger come in. Ricky just tells him to look into Frey's eyes. That wasn't the look of some ordinary human with a short life. Frey tuts by bringing up the betrayal. Still eating, Ricky calmly admits it. Frey asks why. Ricky says the reason doesn't matter to him. He brought Frey there because he wanted his help with the plan. If an apostle dies, their demigod is forced into hibernation. Cold sweat starts running down Frey's face. While they sleep, sure, even a small knife to the neck can kill them. The undead are being made by an apostle, so Ivan wiped them out to draw his anger. That apostle is hiding in the Great Reno jungle. Hearing that, Frey starts connecting the dots. He already knows who Ricky means. In Frederickwood, the apostle of the demigod of death, the same one from Apocalypse, so Ricky wants the two of them to kill him. Then they'd finish off the demigod during hibernation. Unlike Ivan, Frey keeps his head and says he wants no part of it. Still, he asks why Ricky can't just kill the apostle himself. Ricky explains that if he moved, the others might notice. An apostle's mind is linked to their demigod, and if they sensed his betrayal, the whole plan would fail. Frey thinks it over. He doesn't believe killing an apostle would be that simple. Ivan sits there still thinking, but he's done waiting. He wants to fight. Frey says he already beat the Apostle of Lightning, and even in Apocalypse that battle was extremely hard. Ricky asks if he means Indra. He wants proof since Indra is the only lightning demigod. Frey opens his bag and searches for something. He pulls out a vial filled with lightning energy taken from the crystal. One look is enough for Ricky to recognize it as Indra's power. He stands and says he'll be right back. Then he grabs his sword and cuts through the air. A portal opens and he steps through. Then the rift closes behind him. Ivan isn't worried. He knows his master will return, so the two wait in silence. After a while, Ricky comes back. What he brings leaves Frey stunned. Indra's severed head. Frey is horrified. A real demigod had been killed that easily. He's too shocked to respond. Ricky says their goals are the same, so there's no reason not to work together. That's where this video ends.